What was the wildest thing that ever went down on your school bus? I have two. In middle school, my bus once caught fire a block away from the school. It was a tiny one, but enough to call the firefighters. We all piled off the bus and watched them do their thing. They bought a second bus, which also caught fire. Eventually, we were brought a third bus 30 minutes later. This was all during the winter, and we weren't allowed to walk back to the school because of safety reasons. Never understood why it was more safe to have kids standing outside in winter next to a bus on fire than walk them a block back to the school. The other time I was in first grade. My bus driver was a crazy nice guy. He knew all of us. One day my aunt, who always picked me up, wasn't there at the stop. He said that I could stay on the bus and would drive back after the route. Maybe she was just late. We drove back and she still wasn't there. So he asked me which house was mine. He drove us there and parked his bus. We rang the bell a bunch and threw small rocks at our window. Nothing. Her car was there though, so it was very weird. My friend's mum drove by and saw us. She offered to take me to her house so I could call my parents and stay there for a while even though it was her birthday. The bus driver left and said, "Don't worry, she's probably just asleep." Turns out she was eternally asleep and had had an aneurysm earlier that day. I'll never forget that day or the nice driver who wanted to make sure I was safe before he left. He even made sure to look out for me for the rest of the year. Great guy. Freshman year, a girl I was sitting next to opened her backpack and I saw a gat in it. She saw me see it and just gave me a hard glare and shook her head. I planted my eyes on the back of the seat in front of us and didn't even look at her for the rest of the ride. I went to a kind of rough school. Two cops dressed in SWAT gear riding the bus with us. A man had apparently gone on a spree in our neighborhood. The scene apparently wasn't secure yet or something, so the cops had to ride with us while the driver dropped us off. I had a bus driver who would purposefully speed up when going over speed bumps so the kids could catch air. He got fired eventually for running into some garbage cans. I didn't have a bus driver who didn't do that. My last bus driver finally stopped after a fat kid had jumped a little too high out of his seat while going over a speed bump and got launched over 3 seats onto some girl. One time our bus hit a car in a roundabout. The guy we hit was completely at fault. He must not have understood the turning radius of a bus or something. We were close to school and our bus driver was like, "Oh, well, I've got to deal with this." In case it wasn't obvious, I'm going to be doing all of the bus driver voices in my bad impersonation of Otto from The Simpsons. Yes, even the female ones. And yes, with regards to the last story, I'll admit that we probably shouldn't paint all drivers as the yellow rocker from Springfield, because if Otto was in that last story, there's no way he would have dealt with it responsibly, and he might not have even noticed he was in an accident to begin with. Our driver was such a cool and friendly guy. He was also pursuing a master's degree at the time. All of the kids on my school bus made a collective effort to buy him a Kindle at the end of the year because he was always reading, and it was the last year he'd be our bus driver. The student that organized it all gave it to him when she got on the bus. We had senior kids setting off smoke bombs and fireworks on the bus every frickin' year for a month before and after Halloween. A smoke bomb even landed on me and burned through my skirt once. When the bus drivers told them off, they used to just swear and act like they owned the place. Then one day we had a bus driver who just drove the bus to the police station when that crap started, and a few of the kids who were throwing the fireworks were crying when they got taken off the bus by the cops. The buses had CCTV too, so they couldn't even deny it. I was so glad when my older sister started driving and I could get lifts with her instead of going on the bus. A friend of mine when we were like 13 or 14 threw his orange peel in a small folder out the top floor window of a double-decker. Unbeknownst to him, a police riot van was underneath and they hit their windscreen. 2 of the officers, dressed in riot gear, stopped the bus, stormed in and started fully screaming, no holding back, until my friend stepped forward and admitted the blame. They seemed unhinged, roaring at us relentlessly with threats of persecution. Turns out their bark reflected their bite, as the police ended up making an official complaint to the school and my friend got expelled for it. In 1995, my family moved away from where I grew up to another city as my dad changed jobs. I'd just graduated from elementary school, so I was starting high school in a new city. No friends, and this high school was 4 or 5 times the size of the one I was going to go to. We lived in the outskirts, so I rode the yellow bus. The very first day I got on the bus. There were 4 other guys and 1 girl that were on said bus when I got on. One of them immediately strikes up a conversation. I can tell this guy is a high-energy and loud dude. Quite the contrary to me. "Hey, what's your name?" I reply, "My name's James Medford." "James Medford? That name's too long. We need to give you a nickname." And in my head, I was fearing the worst. This guy was going to label me with a goddamn insulting nickname on my first day of school where I knew nobody. The next 5 years could be very long. Luckily, his intent was genuine, and he came up with the nickname Jim. Then he points to a guy sitting quietly across the aisle and says, "That there's D. He's my brother. I think you guys are in the same grade. You guys should be friends." D looks up with a big smile with crooked teeth, a weird pair of thick glasses, and says, "Hey, what's up?" He was tall for a teenager, pushing 6'2". We strike a little conversation up and discover we have many things in common. We're both into RPGs, Magic the Gathering, and things of the such. We were also both the youngest child of 3 boys. We related a lot. It was instant. We were buddies. A few months later, my family moves a little further out of town, which puts me on a different bus route, but I still attended the same school. When we moved to this place, for the first 2 months, my bus ride was 2 hours long one way, so I'd get picked up at 6 a.m. and would only get home at 5:30 p.m. But that's an entirely different story. Fast forward to the summer of '96. I find out that D is moving away to a city a few hours away, so that means my best friend was no longer going to be at the same school as me. D and I completely lost touch. The internet was in its infancy and not everyone had email. We did snail mail a little, but that petered out after a few letters. Several months later, I think it was like April 1997, I get wind that a new kid will be coming to our school in our grade, and he'd be on my bus route. I knew what this kid was going through, moving to a new town, not knowing anyone, so I made a point that I'd be nice to him and help him make friends at school. So, the following Monday, the bus takes a different turn here and there, and we're driving down the street to go pick up this new kid. I look down the road and see this tall, lanky guy. As we pull up closer, it hits me. I know this guy. Yes, indeed, it was my best buddy D, who's back in town. We were both very excited that A, he was back in town, and B, the place he moved to was on the same bus route as me. Today, D and I are still best buds. He was my best man, and I was his best man. We see each other weekly. All of this because his brother gave me a nickname and told us we should be friends. I love you, D. In short, moved to a new city, met a new best friend, he moves away, a year later he moves back and we reconnect, and we're still best buds to this day 20 years later. Ah, that's so sweet. I'm not really in contact with any of my tiny wargaming or nerdy clique from school, so what you've got there is very special. I do wonder if that first guy you talked to was wingmanning his brother for friends, but you can't argue with the result. Once while picking up a kid, a dog got on the bus and everyone went nuts and started petting it. The driver eventually shooed it away. First day of my freshman year, a girl sitting across from me showed off her chest piercing. I always sat near the back of the bus from then on. I was in 5th grade, we all boarded the bus after school. Bus driver starts driving and we were rowdy. Bus driver screams, "Shut the F up!" several times. He starts yelling louder. We ignore him and then suddenly he slams on the brakes. We all fly around the bus. He parks it right there in the lane. He opens the door and walks away. We just watched him fade into the distance. Eventually, parents started showing up and we all got rides home. I'll never forget that bus ride. When I was in 6th grade, I moved from a really small town where I could walk to school every day to a much larger one where I had to ride the bus. I was having trouble finding my way around the school the first week and ended up running very, very late to catch the bus at the end of the day. I was already beating myself up about the fact that I was going to have to call one of my parents who'd have to leave work early to pick me up, but when I got outside, the bus was pulled right up to the doors waiting for me. The bus driver knew I'd been on the bus that morning and verified with my brother that I was supposed to get on to go home, so he waited. I know it seems really insignificant, but with all the stress and anxiety I was feeling trying to settle into the new house, new city, and new school, it made a lasting impression on me. Thank you, Ron. My bus driver from age 4 through about 12 was absolutely crazy. This one road that we went up to was a big long hill that ended in a cul-de-sac, so we'd go all the way up and then circle back the same way we came. On the way down the hill on the way back, there was this bump in the road that would get really bad if it was cold and there was some water frozen under it. So during the winter, we'd beg her to hit the bump so we could get some air. She wouldn't say yes every day, but when she did, she'd speed down the hill, and when we hit the bump, I swear kids would literally hit the ceiling. I have such a distinct memory of turning around after impact and seeing a kid's back hit the top of the bus. She still has her job and is driving buses to this day. At Kids Stop, which was our after-school program for kids whose parents worked late, they had a van they'd use when taking us on small trips. Every time we went somewhere, we'd always go hit the dip in the road a few blocks away first. Every time Donna drove, she used to hit a little harder and we got some serious air in the back seat. One day, a kid chipped his tooth because of how violent the impact was. That was the end of that. Rumor had it the kid chipped his tooth on the ceiling. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I drove a school bus for students who were in the juvenile court system. They had been expelled by every standard school in the district and attended classes at juvie. They'd been through 6 bus drivers in the first 4 weeks of school when I received this school as my first assignment. I started 2 weeks prior. I was a retired Greyhound driver, so their crap wasn't anything I hadn't seen before. They thought they'd run off the other drivers, so I'd just be next if they screwed with me. There were only 12 students, but because of their school, it took about 3 hours to drop them off all over town. The general rule is when you pick up students in the AM, you start with the student furthest from the school and work your way there. In the PM, you drop off the closest first. The 2 students that should have been dropped off first were the worst behavioral cases. They'd throw stuff, scream and swear, and then laugh that they were getting off and too bad for me. I told them to clean up their torn up paper, and they laughed and swore at me. I followed procedure and wrote them up to their principal. This meant nothing, they were already expelled, what else can they do? So, the next day I loaded the students, they started their crap, and I drove the morning route home. You know, furthest kid first. Man, the rest of them started screaming, "I'm gonna call my mama! I'm gonna get you fired!" I laughed. I told them their mum would appreciate that I kept them supervised for an extra 2 hours. Every time one of them acted up, they were the last to get off. If they complained about me turning the radio on, they got Dr. Laura or Sean Hannity. They stopped their bullcrap in a week. 6th grade, the driver stopped on a rural road and 2 sisters got out. The little one darted across the road and almost got hit by a car going 50 miles per hour that didn't stop. I can still feel the tension. 8th grade, a friend taught me how to gleek. Still one of my most useless talents. One day on the ride home in like 3rd grade, this kid Nick that lived in my neighborhood caused a ruckus and the bus driver turned around and pulled back into the school. The bus driver yelled and said, "All right, Mr. Wise Guy, what's your name?" Nick responded, "Nick." The bus driver asked, "What's your last name, Nick?" Nick said, "Elodian." Everyone laughed, but the bus driver didn't catch on. The principal came onto the bus and the bus driver said, "We've had a lot of fooling around on the bus and it was all started by Nickelodeon." We all cried laughing and our principal just shook her head and took Nick off the bus. I had a really big crush on this guy. I was staring longingly at him through the mirror above the bus driver, like dead-on creeper staring. Then he pointed or motioned towards me or something and I suddenly realized he can see me staring at him. Oh my god. And I felt like the stupidest person on earth. I was like a damn cat thinking I can see him in the mirror but he can't see me drooling at him. Gotta wonder how long that was going on before he'd finally had enough and decided to meet eye contact. Was this a one-ride special, or had it been going on for months? It was the late 70s. I think I was in 7th grade. Our bus driver was a very cool guy everyone called Animal. The bus was an old one with a stick shift and clutch. Last day of school, Animal drives the bus to a nearby park and instructs all of us to go to the back of the bus. We all pile up in the last 3 or 4 rows of seats, and he revs the engine and pops the clutch. The guy was popping wheelies in a school bus. Rumor has it he was banging the gym teacher too. Good times. My siblings and I went to a small private school that was about half an hour away from home. We were the only kids on the bus that went to that school, the rest got dropped off at a public school first, and we were the last off at night. Needless to say, we spent more time with the driver, Tom, than the other kids did, and he favored us. After all the other kids got off, he'd let us move around the bus, sweep the floor, or pick the radio station. At Christmas time, he'd share his treats that the other kids gave him as gifts. He was awesome. I'll always remember Tom, the bus driver. Waiting for the bus with a bunch of other kids in front of my apartment complex, saw a tabby cat get completely murked by a passenger car. Front wheels hit the cat got flung up against the wheel, hit the ground, then got smacked by the muffler. The driver immediately stopped and got out as the cat sprinted away. I figured the cat went off and died somewhere. After school that day, I went with a friend of mine over to the house of a friend of his, whom I didn't know. There I saw a tabby cat that looked identical to the one that got smoked in the street earlier. I asked him, "Is this your cat?" He replied, "Yeah, she got hit by a car today, but she seems okay." Not sure why this stuck with me, but this was during the cooler months where you'd just crack the window to get a bit of fresh air. We'd play football, the triangle paper kind, by kicking it back and forth. I kicked it one time and it went out the window. The window was only open far enough that it could barely slide through on the side. Then, the triangle flew back into the bus, 7 windows down, also through a window that was barely open enough to have it fit through. It hit a guy in the face. It was extremely bizarre. I had drunk lots of coffee the night before, trying to stay awake and study for a test. As I got on my bus the next morning, I start to get a real bad case of the squirts. But this is nothing I've never experienced before. 10 minutes into my 50-minute bus ride, I was starting to sweat. Then I panic. I try making eye contact with my bus driver through that front mirror. Maybe he'll see my distress. Maybe he'll pull over and I can release my load at a Burger King. I ended up squatting over my paper lunch bag and taking a massive dump in it, all while sobbing and staring at the back of the girl who sat in the seat in front of me. Afterwards, I was just so flustered. I buckled the bag next to me for the rest of the ride. It was a low point in my life. A few months later, I did it again. Some kid in the back of the bus was being given grief by this bully. My school district didn't really do crap about bullies. The kid being bullied was just sitting 3 to a seat with his legs in the aisle, and the bully was sitting by one of his friends, in the aisle across from the kid he was messing with. The bully decided to start pushing the kid's leg. Before it was verbal, but now it was physical. The kid told the bully to stop. Bully mocked him and did it again. Kid then punched the bully in the nose, breaking it and causing a huge amount of blood to leak from it. By now, the bus had stopped at some bus stop. The kid gets his stuff, gets off at the bus stop that's a few ahead of his, and the second he's off, he starts running and going a different route to his house. The bus driver had been unaware of what had happened until someone yelled for the bus driver to call someone because the bully's nose wouldn't stop bleeding. So he calls someone while the bully is calling his mum, crying. So we get the police to show up. His mum and other kids have called their parents because at this point we've been at a standstill for more than 30 minutes. They call the principal too. We don't know who called the police, so they, along with the principal, are asking who did it and getting us to confess. And we're all like, we don't know. Of course we did know, but why would we tell on our hero? The principal and police are talking and they think the kid is still on the bus. We then say, oh, he got off. We don't know where he went or who he was. The principal and police look at the bus driver who shrugs because she didn't realize what was going on until it was too late. We spent 2 hours on that hot bus because of it, but I couldn't even be mad. My middle school bus was wild. The bus driver when I was in early grade school was named Ross. My neighborhood was the first stop in the mornings, so we were always the first people on the bus. One day he picked us up and somehow forgot all about the other stops. There were like 10 to 15 total. He gets like a block away from the school when he realizes there's only like 8 kids on the bus. He turns around and goes back through every stop, but all the other kids have already gotten rides with their parents because we were over 30 minutes behind schedule by this point. I ended up being almost an hour late to school. As a kid, it was hilarious. As an adult, I think Ross was on something. One time, my friend pushed me out of the seat and I fell and face-planted on a guy's eggplant. This is almost 30 years ago. My buddy and me were very big Star Wars fans and this was our first year taking the bus. We'd sit behind the driver every day and whenever his little stop sign activated, a small red light on his dashboard would flash. Every time this happened, one of us would reach past him, pointing and yell, "What's that flashing?" reliving the scene from Episode 5 in the Millennium Falcon. We did this every day for months. The driver never asked why or asked us to stop. I'm sure he's long dead and often wondered what the F was wrong with us. That's pretty harmless as far as the crap that kids can get up to on the bus goes. A lot of drivers back then would honestly just let anything fly, including fights as long as the kids aren't directly targeting the drivers themselves. Leroy. High school. We named our bus driver Leroy. 1996, before Leroy Jenkins. This ride-or-die mother effer would not speak. He pulled up in his bus, opened the swing arm, glared at us, waited and closed the swing arm. Then waited. Once we were seated, he would drive. Not a word, ever. We drank, we smoked, and we hooked up. What finally broke him was a fight. Leroy pulled his bus over and got out of his seat. Standing in the aisle, Leroy said, "That's enough." The entire bus went silent. Leroy was the frickin' man. When some goth kids wrote pig and then the B word on the back of my book bag, I walked around middle school that entire day without knowing. What they didn't realize is I couldn't afford a new book bag. I had to have someone draw a puppy over it. I was in 5th grade going home from school. One of the kids in the year below me decided once he got off the bus that it would be a great idea to moon all the kids still on. Well, he pulled his pants down too far and everyone got an eyeful of his junk, including the bus driver. He got in big trouble with the school and got teased for ages after that. In grade school, a girl with really long hair was sitting next to an open window and her hair got snagged by a tree limb. It ripped a chunk of scalp off her head about the size of a tennis ball. The middle schoolers would always ride the bus at the same time as the high schoolers did in the mornings. Second day of 8th grade and 2 high schoolers in the back had brought their guitars on the bus with them and played the entire way. The bus getting pulled over and the driver getting arrested. What's the most cringeworthy thing you've ever seen an ungrateful jerk do? My sister once started crying and locked herself in her room after my parents spent the last of their money buying her a Game Boy, because the Game Boy was grey and not pink. Same thing happened to me a few years ago. My sister wanted a laptop, I was in college but had a little bit of Christmas money saved up, so I decided to get her something. I did a bunch of reading about what was the best kind of used laptop to buy, and ended up getting her an IBM ThinkPad T51. I formatted it, installed Windows XP, and went down to the school bookstore and got a student copy of Office to install on it. I was talking to my mum the next day and mentioned what I was getting her. My mum says, "Oh, well, she really wanted one of those new pink laptops. You should have gotten her one of those." I explained that I didn't have the hundreds to spend on a brand new Dell for her, but this was a perfectly nice IBM that would do great for her first year of college. She was graduating high school that year. Later that day, I got a call from my sister where she proceeded to scream at me and demand I get her the pink Dell she wanted. Screw that. I sold it on eBay and ended up making some money on it. I don't remember what I got her that year, but it was something cheap, crappy, and from Walmart. She dealt without a laptop until she was desperate, and I gave her an even crappier one than the IBM that a friend had given to me that was destined for his trash can. My aunt gave a small birthday party for my cousin, who was turning 25, last fall. He got really upset and angry because she bought him a pair of black skateboarding shoes instead of brown ones. She tried to calmly explain that she couldn't find any brown ones, but he wasn't having it. I almost slapped him. My sister was so unhappy with the car my parents got her that she tried to sell it every time it was parked. That was back before cell phones, so the only number she had to give was the home phone, which my parents always answered if they were there. They got her back by moving the car one day and telling her that someone bought it, but since it was their car, they got the money for it. Oh God, maybe they should have actually sold it and she could just take that as a lesson. I think most of us were ungrateful jerks for at least a period of our childhoods, but I think teenage me would have known that the limit to acceptable behavior ended several kilometers before measures like this. One of my friends received a car for their 18th birthday from their grandparents. A free car. Their response was to break down in tears, saying how much they hated it because it was an old man car, and then absolutely refused to drive it ever. That's about when I had an epiphany and wanted that person out of my life immediately. After my mum died, my stepdad took some of the insurance money and bought his daughter a brand new SUV. I heard she threw a screaming fit in the driveway because it wasn't a sports car. By the way, me and my other siblings got nothing at all from him. Of course, now she's 35 and still lives with her dad and still screams and whines for everything she wants, so I guess karma is a witch, and so is my stepsister. I built my stepson a gaming computer, helped him set it up and got some games loaded up on it for him so we could game together and bond some more. As soon as I had it all set up, he told me to get out of his room and closed the door. I spent 4 months saving and buying parts for it one at a time. My parents got her a DS and it got stolen a week later. I found it as I was taking out the trash and placed it back in her room. A day after that, I found it in pieces in the trash and I screamed at that witch for an hour. I didn't think to tell my parents about it at the time, I was just furious. I had this issue with a group of children I'll allow to remain anonymous. They complained about their Christmas gifts being either too cheap, too lame, or one of many other things. Their father returned all of the gifts to the store and bought something for himself and their mother. The following year, they were very humble and thankful for the gifts they received. Similar story, we had a family friend that was like an uncle to us. He had kids that were much older than us, and one Christmas they made a huge deal about the lameness of their presents. What does the father do? He packs up all the presents in his car and donates them to a local orphanage. Every Christmas, my in-laws ask me to cook dinner for them. They always want steaks, and I always make sure to cook them exactly as ordered. I've been cooking for years at a restaurant and now at the firehouse, and I know my way around a steak. Every year I stand out in the cold and grill their dinner while they sit inside and enjoy the fire. Every year they insist that their steaks are pink. Every year I prove to them that the lighting in the dining room is pinkish, and if they'd simply come outside and view their steaks in the natural light, they'd know. So then I go back outside and grill their steaks until they turn to charcoal to make them happy, and then every year I have to listen to 6 months of complaints about how freaking tough the steaks were. My 16-year-old cousin whined about how our grandparents only gave her £100 for Christmas. I informed her that they're pensioners and she should shut the frick up. Here's one of way too many. There was an early morning cardiac arrest call. We worked on this guy furiously, got a pulse back, everything went right. Good call. Guy gets into the catheter lab right away and walks out of the hospital alive a couple of weeks later. Then his cranky wife sends us a bill for carpet cleaning and says that we tracked in mud on her carpet when we were saving her husband's life. A girl in one of my classes in high school got in all angry and crabby one morning. The teacher asked her what was wrong, and she began by saying her daddy promised her a Mercedes-Benz for her birthday, but she wasn't going to get one after all. At first I thought, okay, fine, her dad was just messing with her and she didn't realize it. After a few minutes of, oh my god, it's not fair, I hate my life, she explained why she wasn't getting the Benz after all. Apparently her mother didn't approve of her having a sporty Benz as her first car. The mum was afraid it would encourage the daughter to drive recklessly. So the mum got the dad to buy a brand new Cadillac CTS with all the bells, dings and whistles instead. Minor upshot, not even a month later she totaled the car. As far as I know, her parents fixed it, but kept it for themselves after that. In short, girl who only has a driver's permit gets crazy upset because she got a brand new Cadillac instead of a Benz for her birthday. My grandma spent a whole frickin' year, knitting me, my brother and sister sweaters. Very nice sweaters in our favorite colors. My brother looked at this and said, "Why would you waste your time making this? I don't even wear sweaters. I'm more of a hoodie guy." He was 18 at the time and that makes it even worse. Ungrateful jerk. Hi, narrator here. So, let's all form a mob and go and find this guy. I will and have accepted many crimes in my time listening to the antics of people on this channel, but I will not stand for disrespecting your sweet old grandma. My niece is 14. For the better part of 5 years, my parents, her grandparents, have been raising her because her parents are deadbeats. Because of what her past was like, witnessing awful behavior at home, lots of emotional problems, she is spoiled rotten. Last year for Christmas, my parents bought her a $400 camera that's nicer than any of us have ever had. This year for Christmas, she spent the entire day complaining about how terrible her camera was and how it takes awful pictures and how she deserves a new one. Another story, my parents gave her a used iPhone, she's 14. This was a few months ago with an OtterBox case. She took the case off because it was ugly and then promptly carelessly dropped it on the ground, shattering the screen. She blamed it on my parents, saying they should have gotten her a case for it. I have endless stories about her. She also broke her nice laptop by being careless and whined every day for a new one. I've never wanted to whack a kid as much as I have her at times. And I feel like I should add that like all situations, it's a complicated one. She's had a difficult past, which is no excuse for her behavior, but it is why my parents spent the better part of her earlier years giving her lots of loving attention. Even as young as 7 and 8, she's been very depressed, on antidepressants, and in therapy. She's made leaps and bounds in improvement, but still struggles with low self-esteem. She's also a teenager. A lot of her behavior can be attributed to the way she was raised until my parents took her in. My parents are doing some things to curb her behavior, and most of the time she's an engaging, intelligent, grateful kid, but she still has moments where we're all just dumbfounded at what comes out of her mouth. My parents have realized that they may have taken things too far with the material gifts and are working to change things. They're both in their 60s and are still supporting my sister and other niece and nephew, as well as raising my 14-year-old and 10-year-old nieces while working full-time. I've even taken a step back sometimes to remind myself of how complicated life can be. My brother and I were raised by a single mother, our father having died when I was 4, and my brother 8. After he died, we moved from where we lived to where my grandparents live to be closer to family. One day, my brother and I were apparently just acting like brats. I don't remember it, I was young, maybe 7 at the time. We wouldn't help my mother clean up or something. Well, my mother told my brother to watch me for a little bit, and then she left for my grandma's, 3 minutes away. I learned later from my brother, who was told by my grandma, that my mother left that day so she could sit at my grandma's and cry. She just cried about how she couldn't take everything we were doing. I've never felt worse about anything in my whole life, and I was probably 8 years old when I found out. You know, some of these stories make me feel way better about my value as a daughter. This one is about my sister's dad. I was in 6th grade and my sister was in 8th. We only had 4 classes for extracurricular activities, and she had already taken all of them, as they'd only lasted 3 weeks. So her teacher, and eventually mine, Mrs. McCulley, started teaching her American Sign Language during 6th period instead of what she usually did during that hour. My sister worked hard and became an impressive translator using sign for her age. Mrs. McCulley scheduled a special performance for her to debut her skill using 8th grade graduation ceremonies. She signed "You Raise Me Up," and it was beautiful. She fumbled a little bit during the middle of the song but smiled and mouthed "sorry" to the audience and continued on flawlessly. After the ceremony was over, her father walked up to her and said, "Well, you messed that up, didn't you?" Instead of being proud and grateful to have a talented child, he snubbed her. She was so ashamed and embarrassed, she never did sign again. She could have had a promising career teaching it, and he messed it up. I hate him for that. I try to encourage her to get back into it. She has a 3-year-old son, turning 4 in June, and I'm trying to convince her that he'd benefit from learning to communicate using ASL. She still has contact with her dad. I have nothing to do with him. He's a jerk and always will be. She really believes one day he'll change, and she's crazy, but I guess he is her dad. Also, his girlfriend is pregnant. He's bringing another child into this world to mess up. Yay. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My cousin, who's 16, ran away from home because her mum wouldn't buy her a Droid razor. They couldn't afford it. Her mum was working 2 jobs just to support her. She was only gone for a few days, but just long enough to get pregnant. A girl at my high school put a brick on her gas pedal and crashed her brand new Mustang into a concrete wall at school. All because the car she got for her 16th birthday was the wrong color. And she kept bragging that she'd get a new one. "I'm just teaching my parents a lesson." She got expelled and arrested. After that, I don't know. It was 2 months from graduation. I suppose this is more of a funny one because we all need it. One day I got a little pedal go-kart for Christmas. I was so excited. It was amazing, not nearly as excited as my little sister, who got a Barbie playhouse. But she didn't want that anymore, she wanted my go-kart. She wailed and screamed for 2 hours until I gave in and let her have a go. And she pretty much monopolized it for the whole of Christmas, while I made a fort out of the leftover boxes and wrapping paper and threw walnuts into the fire and at my dad. It was fun. Thank you for this little dose of positivity in the face of overwhelming horridness and humanity. I'm sure your sister grew out of it, although I must protest the wasting and busting of good nuts. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had gotten me Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the NES as a birthday present. I was turning like 4 or 5. It was the one thing I really wanted. I loved the Ninja Turtles, and what better than a video game about them? Except, she put it in a box for a toaster. I assumed to throw me off from the fact that she was getting me a video game. So there I was, 4 or 5 years old, and I unwrap a toaster. From the grandmother who always spoils the grandkid, getting them whatever they want. I remember the disappointment that washed over me immediately. Why would my grandma get me a toaster, was all I could think. It was too much grief. I started to cry and bawl my eyes out. I didn't calm down until they opened the box and showed that inside she had indeed gotten me the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video game. On a related note, holy frick was that game hard for a 5-year-old. I know a friend whose mum absolutely spoiled her. Her mum, despite being disabled and with very limited income, does everything she possibly can for her only daughter, buys her phones, expensive clothes, whatever she wants, and most recently, a new car. Heck, she even does her homework for her, since my friend is D'ing or failing all of her classes, simply because she hates school and can't be bothered, even though she says she wants to go to college. All in all, this girl is blessed with an awesome frickin' mom. My friend, however, usually doesn't have many pleasant things to say about her mum unless it's on Facebook. So apparently there's this fair that they go to as a family every year, and her dad had recently died, so it would be the first year without him. Her mum brings it up, and my awful ingrate friend point-blank says she's not going to let her mum go. Why? Because she only wants her jerk of a boyfriend there. Her mum, who was on the verge of tears, said, "But we go every year." It broke my heart. My spoiled teenage cousin almost earned himself a punch in the crotch last Christmas. We were talking about what we each got for Christmas that year since we're both gamers. I was excited that my wife had gotten me Star Wars The Old Republic. He got a bunch of games, a new 360 since his old one was, quote, dirty and scratched, from his nerd raging. It came with Kinect, a Fender guitar, a new drum set, an iPhone 4 to replace his stupid 3GS, and since he'd just turned 16, his parents gave them their old 2009 Toyota SUV. The thing was sweet, fully loaded and beautiful. I was like, damn dude, that's one heck of a haul. His reply? Yeah right, that car is freaking gay. My buddy at school's parents got him a Honda S2000, a Burton snowboard, and him and his girlfriend new iPhones. Plus they got to go on a cruise for Christmas. I told my parents what car I wanted, they're just cheap. I gave him a verbal beatdown the likes of which he needed to hear, rubbing in just how rough his life is, all the while he's rolling his eyes. This encounter, as well as the rest in this story grouping, are an extremely effective form of birth control. I was at a UN camp for high schoolers. This girl was whining about how her 16th got ruined because the BMW convertible she got from her parents was yellow and not red. As a kid from a poor public school, I just wanted to punch her in the nose. It wasn't the most expensive of gifts, but my mum bought me a sweatshirt I really wanted for Christmas. I was in my scene kid stage and I wanted my clothes to fit tight, so I told my mum to get me a medium even though she'd normally buy me a large. Well, I opened up my gift, got excited when I saw that it was a sweatshirt, and then immediately threw a fit when I saw the sweatshirt was a large. I basically threw it on the couch and went, great, well now I'm never going to wear this. I acted like a jerk the rest of the day and made it a point to not even try the sweatshirt on. Eventually, I put it on in my room and it fit perfectly. I thought about the fact that I'd yelled at my mum for something that she bought out of love for me and didn't need to get me in the first place. I felt pretty frickin' ashamed of myself and I gave her a sob-filled apology. I'm always grateful anytime anyone gives me any sort of gift now, even if it's something I wouldn't want in a million years. All that can come to mind is my girlfriend, soon perhaps to be ex. She cooked dinner on Friday night, and Saturday after she had left for work, I stuck behind and cleaned her entire apartment. I washed all of the pots and pans. It was Italian, so it required a lot to cook, and then I went on to clean her whole place. This morning she snapped at me for washing the dishes twice. I didn't know the ones in the washer were already clean, and then I told her, wow, I guess I shouldn't have washed all those pots in your apartment too. I have spinal surgery tomorrow, Monday, and 2 severely herniated discs in my back, and it hurt a lot to do it, but I like trying to help her. I've taken her out for countless nice meals, which she ruins with her negativity. The waitress will ask her, do you want another drink? And she'll respond in a witchy tone, I don't know. Do I? And the waitress will just give her a look of confusion. I'm tired of having to apologize for her and leave huge tips because of her C-word behavior. I have surgery on Monday, and I CC her on the email to my parents, which just states the time and place my parents are taking me, and all she said that night was, why did you send me this email? I said I thought you'd want to know the details, and she said, I'm not waking up at 6:30. Frick. I'm ranting. So the narrator is certainly missing a lot of the positive events and nuanced dynamics and complications of this relationship, but still feels pretty secure in saying, dump her. My little sister was 16 and already had a very active bedroom life with her boyfriend, but wouldn't tell my mum. She calls me one night and tells me that they ran out of Johnnies and decided to do the deed anyway. I told her that she needs to get Plan B or take some of my birth control. I looked it up and you can take 4 of the kinds of pills I had to be as effective as Plan B. I didn't have $55 to give her for Plan B, but I did have the extra birth control pills that she could have. I told her I'd drive them over right then, because the sooner she took them, the better. My sister agreed with me, so at midnight I left to drive across town to give her some emergency contraception. As I'm pulling into my parents' drive, I get a call from my older sister. My younger sister had called her and convinced her to spend $55 on Plan B. The same thing I was bringing her except free, and to call me and to tell me not to worry about it. So my older sister shells out $55 for pills and asks my little sister if she has the money to pay her back. Little sister tells her no, so the older sis told younger sis that she can babysit a couple of nights for her to pay off the debt. Fast forward a week later, my younger sister is watching my niece. As per the secret between sisters birth control debt payment plan, my niece's dad comes to pick her up and they leave. My dad asks my sister if they paid her for babysitting, and my little sister says, no, my older sister didn't pay me anything for babysitting. My dad calls my older sister and tears her out about how she's a cheap piece of crap sister for not paying younger sis for babysitting. In short, my little sister is an absolute C-word.
My older sister absolutely cracked it, Australian for had a hissy fit, when she had to use her Centrelink money, the government money, to come interstate when my dad was in hospital because, wait for it, he didn't die. She basically said I spent all of that money and he didn't even die. I lost my passive-aggressive crap and have barely spoken to her since. We've had a few disagreements over the years.
So far, from all of these stories I've heard, I've figured out that teenagers get expensive cars somehow. I'm 24 and I can't afford to own a car with insurance and gas money. How do these 15 to 18-year-olds afford it? I can understand a parent buying a car, but dropping a couple of $100 to $1,000 on gas money and still having ungrateful children? I'm going to look at kittens or something to cheer myself up. A woman I worked with bought iPads for her children for Christmas. They both got mad and refused the gifts. The daughter started crying and locked herself in her room for the rest of the day. They wanted to go to New York City, not have a stupid computer. Okay, maybe some context would help. The daughter wanted to go to New York City to do shopping and to see Broadway plays. They'd already been at least once before for cultural reasons, and the son wanted a car. Both were in their very early 20s at the time. Also, we live in North Carolina, so it's not like we can just pop into town for the day. I'm gonna just go ahead and start reading these comments in fear of getting too angry and throwing my laptop across the room. Professionals. How have ignorant idiots misinterpreted or minimized your job? My wife described my job to me as tootling around on the computer all day. I'm the sole database administrator for my entire company. Oh boy, every conversation I have when people ask what I do. I say I'm the system administrator for a university, and inevitably they answer, "So, you fix computers?" "Sure." At school, my niece told her class that her dad plays golf and drinks beer for a job. He's a doctor that left the medical field to work in consulting. My ex of 5 years described my job as, "All you do all day is go diving." Oil rigs don't build themselves, and making a dive to 200 feet to install a pipeline is no small task. Nor is doing mid-water work on installing anodes on a caisson, but she never complained about the money I made. I heard about an incident a couple of weeks ago in the North Sea where a guy got cut off from umbilical for 45 minutes. He hugged the pipeline and passed out on an 8-minute oxygen supply. They managed to revive him after that. Your job is terrifying. Respect. My best friend called me a pipetting slave monkey. I'm a genetics PhD. She is absolutely right, though. Many people think I'm only a kind of butcher, killing animals all day and extracting their brains. I do preclinical research in the field of Alzheimer's disease. Every time I tell someone what I do, they respond with, "Oh, you're the guy that parks the plane." I'm an air traffic controller, tower control. Ugh, dressing up like a working girl. I dress up as Disney princesses and fairies with other girls, and I visit children's birthday parties and mostly terminally ill children. I think if people use this particular criticism, it raises a lot more questions about their free time and bedroom lives than it does about your job. What are they paying people to do in their own time? I got told the only reason I wanted to be a theatre techie was so that I wouldn't have to get up early in the morning. I really wanted to call and wake that person up at 6:30 in the morning yesterday when I was unloading a truck in the rain. I'm the only girl at an IT consulting company. My grandmother told me it was a good thing because this way I have a better chance of sleeping my way to the top. As a male in the IT field with mainly female bosses, your grandmother is either very wrong or very right, as I can't get promoted no matter what I do. I'm currently getting my PhD in ecology. My grandfather said he couldn't wait for me to get home so I could landscape his yard. A couple of family members have made comments about how I don't have to do any work and that I just sign the checks. I own an IT company. I've tried to explain that I typically put in 40 to 60 hours a week, and that if I screw up at my job, a whole lot of people won't even have a job to come to, but they still don't get it. On a similar note, at my old job, my coworkers and I, engineers, used to make fun of the technical lead on a project because about 75% of his time was talking with the customers. We'd say things like, "Oh, you're just looking at graphs and meeting with the customers again, eh?"
"Yeah, those emails won't write themselves, better get cracking."
Sipping martinis with the bigwigs again? Real tough job you've got there. Then he started CCing us on the emails and including us in the meetings. We stopped making fun of him. A policeman whose life I had the pleasure of saving referred to me and my fellow EMTs as an overpriced taxi service. We'll see who's laughing next time he gets shot. I'm just kidding, I'll still treat him. I'm a video game designer, and I will never hear the end of it. Apparently, I just look at the computer and games are made. The best response I got came from a cabbie. So, what do? I'm a game designer, I make video games. What, they're made? No, they grow on trees, we just harvest them. Sometimes we say that the pipe fitters on site are plumbers and the civil engineers are rebar layers. They don't like it. I work at one of the top recording studios in the city, one of 2 employees in its 40 years that didn't go to school for audio engineering. I got my education for free while I was getting paid. I didn't come into the job blind, I got hired based on what I could do and had already done. I was making a real salary and living in my own place, while my friends were barely halfway through university. My grandma won't accept that I can have a good job without having gone to school, and she doesn't understand what I could possibly do for sound in television ads, movies, and video games. She tries to convince me to go back to school every time I see her. Her new husband said I should become a security guard. We should swap grandmas. I'm still working on my master's, and finally, after working full-time and school part-time, I'm in a situation where I can go to school full-time and finish this thing. Since then, all I hear from my grandmother is, "Do you have a job yet?" or "Get a job." She sees education for women as something you do when you're young and fairly useless after adulthood has started. So I feel your reverse pain. I'm an on-call locksmith that works graveyard, so literally my job consists of sitting around my house and getting paid waiting for the phone to ring. It's a pretty easy job, the only drawback is that I have to stay up until 7 a.m. The other day my girlfriend was giving me crap about what I did all night by saying, "All you do is smoke green herb and tickle your pickle while you're at work. Oh, and that Reddit website too." She's 100% accurate. I used to be a hospital microbiologist. I get a lot of, "Oh, so like all you do is take blood?" Yeah, sure, because we needed a 4-year degree to learn how to take blood, and infectious diseases identify themselves with their own cute little micro-driver's license. The kicker? I suck at taking blood. I get called a glorified babysitter all the time. I'm a kindergarten teacher. My wife thinks she's hilarious when I say that I had a rough day as a VMware engineer by responding, "Did you get tired from all the waiting and clicking?" You just touch people for money. I'm a massage therapist. I'm a bank teller, and while at Subway last week, the guy making my sandwich told me I have it so easy and that I just give people money all day. I wanted to say, no, you just sit here and make sandwiches all day, and people get a lot more upset when there's a problem with their life savings rather than when they don't get enough mustard on their sub. This might be one of those grass is always greener situations. I feel like bank tellers are a little higher on the social pecking order at least, but then again, you probably have to deal with stuffier and more dismissive clientele than you would at Subway. Then again, I'd rather do anything than work in hospitality for a living again, so I'll try getting screamed at by rich jerks any day. I would never purposefully trivialize my husband's job, but when people ask me what he does, I usually say he's in IT. He hates this. He's a computer programmer and software developer. The thing is, most people I know don't really know what a programmer or developer does, but they know IT means he works with computers. I've actively been trying to catch myself and now say computer programmer when someone asks. Better than my grandma at least. When people ask what he does, she says, "Computers." But hey, she's 80, so that's actually good for her. My ex-girlfriend didn't appreciate my business. I own and run a poker league. We have over 400 players each season. I have 4 part-time employees. I do all the accounting, marketing, and web updating myself. Because our games are at bars, she thought all I did was hang out with friends and drink beer all night. She said she didn't feel I was challenged enough. The challenge was paying for all of our bills while she didn't make any money. Play games all day. I work in QA. We have to break a game, not play it. There's a different mentality to it. You play a game to enjoy the experience. If you're QA, you're interfacing with that game to understand and to learn its imperfections within its code. We also have to then record our findings. It's like practical science experiments in a universe someone else has created, and you're confined to one space. In that space, you do all as you may do to make something happen that's not supposed to happen. It's awfully repetitive and can make you never want to play the most awesome games ever again. Like, for example, entering and leaving a certain section of the level multiple times for hours on end. There are multiple different ways, over and over again, documenting the outcomes and identifying where the glitches and bugs may exist. I heard it truly is like taking all the fun out of a game. When do I get to shoot stuff? Never. Keep walking in circles and tell me when you see any clipping. My girlfriend told me, you just play on the internet all day. I work as an industrial programmer and ordering systems administrator. I work in an office for the Department of Transport. I have nothing whatsoever to do with the operational side of things like selling tickets, running buses and trains. However, after 3 years, I still get odd moments from my mum when there are transport delays that suggest she thinks I can get called out to help direct buses or some crap. I've tried to explain what I do, but I don't really think it's stuck. My dad said that all I do at work, KFC, is serve people chicken. Get lost, Bunt, I wash the trays too. Pharmacy. Why does it take 20 minutes to count out 30 tablets? Says the irate customer. Well, I also have to enter the RX, check that it doesn't interact with any other med you're on, make sure it's the proper dose and medication for your problem, make sure you're taking the medication correctly, deal with the rejection from your insurance company because the doctor wrote for an obscenely expensive substance, count the medication, and then double-check everything I just did. I also have to stop working on yours to answer questions about over-the-counter medications and responding to, where is the bread, or what wiper blades do I need for my car? And I apologize, but there were 30 patients in front of you. Now that it's filled, I need to come talk to you and ensure that you understand everything, since your doctor most likely didn't tell you it all. It's not fast food pharmacy. I have 8 years of school to be able to do this. I hold your life in my hands. My dad filmed a video of my sister massaging a horse, she's a failed horse massage therapist, and then he told me my job was easy and he didn't see why people pay me so much. I'm a high-end surgical videographer. I have to intricately know the ins and outs of dozens of types of surgeries, and frequently I have to know how to do it better than the surgeon I'm filming. Yes, I frequently see the world's best surgeons make mistakes or take extreme and flippant risks with patients. Whenever I tell people I have an undergraduate degree in psychology, they ask if I can read people's minds. I instantly peg them as a moron. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friend, who's a nurse, suggested that my job as a care assistant was pretty much not needed as nurses really do all the proper work. All we apparently do is change the patients. When a resident or patient is dying in my work, it's not the nurse that sits with them or their family offering comfort, it's not the nurse who sits with them until they've stopped breathing, nor is it the nurse who washes and dresses the body after they've passed. In fact, other than turning on oxygen or occasionally giving out tablets and handing out important-looking reports, our nurses don't interact with the residents or patients much at all. Our nurses can't even tell the family what their mum or dad has eaten all day, how they slept, or what he did before bed, without a care assistant reporting this in information. I'm not saying that nurses aren't needed, by the way, but both jobs are as important as the other. And look, I can't overstate this enough, I don't hate nurses. I've had some very positive experiences as well as a patient in the ICU myself, and a lot of my friends are nursing grads. I'm also aware in hospital the nursing situation is very different. This is my reaction to a comment made by a nurse I know, and my experience in my workplace. So please, if you're a nurse, don't take offense. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology and I work as an IT project manager. People can never quite understand how the two go together. Motivation? Understanding what needs to be done? Teams of people working together to achieve a singular goal? Effective communication on multiple levels? Psychology? Huh? I just don't see the connection there. I work for the US Air Force. My job is a munitions inspector. I have to inspect all outbound and inbound munitions, as well as a periodic inspection on all munitions in the bomb dump. The fact that I work with millions of dollars of high-value explosives daily means nothing to my wife. I've seen people get seriously injured on the job, as well as heard horror stories of fingers being shot off by 20mm or people burning to death from a flare mishap. I go home some days exhausted and covered in residue, and my wife just hands me my son and says, "Ugh, I need a break from him." As if I didn't just work with explosives all day. She wakes up at 8:30, I have to be at work for 6:45. He takes at least 2 one-hour naps a day. And sometimes I might go home for lunch to find her either passed out on the couch or watching Family Feud or The Price is Right. Look, it sounds like you do indeed have a very serious job, but it honestly sounds like you both need to get a healthy amount of respect for the work the other puts into running your household, because parenthood is no joke either. I work from home. That doesn't mean I sleep in until 11 a.m. and sit around watching TV all day. It means that when I'm working on a project, I work almost around the clock because I live and work in the same place. When I don't have a project, I'm incredibly busy catching up on all of the housework and errands that get neglected when I do have a project. We have a 110-year-old wooden house, so yeah, there are always things to be done. Now excuse me while I return to stripping the paint on the molding in the toilet so that I can repaint it. I'm a consultant. My mum described my job as talking to people about stuff. My girlfriend told me that I hang around with the guys all day and shoot the crap. It can't be that hard. I'm a construction worker for the union. My position requires climbing heights of more than 90 feet, scaling from walls in a body harness with about 80 pounds of tools attached to me. I'm consistently told that I just drive around all day, that it can't be that hard or tiring. I'm a fricking truck driver. I have to deal with every idiot they give a driver's license to. She said I just sit around and play on the computer looking at those pictures with the captions, which I'm a Redditor. They said that all I do is sit around waiting to push a button every 108 minutes. My dad hates that I don't work in some form of IT. He hates that I'm, quote, wasting my life away as a salesman. I run an award-winning business that has watched nearly all of its competitors shutter their doors in recent years while we've flourished. I've been flown around the country on trips, vacations, generally non-working trips, by my vendors for top shop awards, sales growth awards, etc. I have a long list of employees that return each year because they love working here, and a longer list of people who are dying to work here. Sales is only about 25% of my actual job. I love selling and jump on the floor when I can, but it's not that often. Since he likes to generalize my job so much, I refer to him as a repairman. He repairs computers, so he's a repairman. I've got 2 bosses. One is amazing and knows just how hard I do work. The other said I make things look pretty. I arrange all the merchandise in a party and crafts store with 2 sales floors, often relocating entire sections to allow for seasonal changeovers. When people ask me if I'm still a physiotherapist, they do that kind of massagey thing with their hands. No, you idiots, I'm not a massage therapist. It's not even close. If someone asks Mum, I'm the IT guy at college. Technically, my job is called AV, MM, and IT presenter. They butchered 3 jobs to build my job, so it's a jack of all trades. Hardware, software, lecturer, heck, anything with a plug sometimes. My mum still thinks I'm in IT. I lost my job after September 11th, and I've been working a desk job at a legal firm since 2003. I'm still behind a desk and still working with computers, so as far as she's concerned, I'm in IT. I'm a professional youth soccer coach and part-time referee. I can't tell you how often I get asked what my other real job is. I'm a graphic designer for 3 large clients, and my friend has always said my specialty is basically coloring. There are days I want to slap them. I work at McDonald's. Everyone thinks I just flip burgers for a living, which is false. The burgers are cooked on both sides at once and don't need to be flipped when they're cooking. Audio and video integrator here. I design systems for video conferencing and presentation systems for Fortune 500 companies. I also develop the software to control all of these systems, AMX and Crestron. My family thinks I sell TVs. I'm an MI analyst. Most people don't know what that is, so they just say, he messes around with computers, but if you need help with Excel formula, he'll do it for you. There was a project manager at my last job who said I was Neo from the Matrix because I could look at pages of code and instantly understand it. I thought that was pretty awesome. Even altered my SAS preferences to display green code on a black background, but it looked pretty horrendous, so I switched it back eventually. I have a BS in mathematics. My father always used to introduce me by saying, "This is my son, he's in school for math. He can count really, really high." When I was the head line cook in an 8-person kitchen, my dad wouldn't let me cook for the family at home because, according to him, all I did at work was cook French fries. He refused to believe that any employer would ever put me in a position of authority over anyone else. When I stacked hay as a summer job in my younger years, I'd come home every night exhausted and my mother would angrily tell me that I shouldn't be tired because throwing grass, as she called it, was easy. Added to that, she convinced my dad I was on green herb, and that's why I was tired all the time. I'm a musician/audio engineer by trade, which really means I tootle around on Reddit all day. I mean, the narrator feels called out. I'm also technically an audio engineer who is on Reddit all day, but I'd like to point out that's rather specific for the job I do on this channel. But yeah, what this person's joking about is actually accurate for me. For centuries, men have grossly minimized domestic work, hence the term the invisible economy. I'm a professional musician. A lot of people think all I do is smoke green herb, do white snow, and drink a lot and then play a bit and party some more. But I don't smoke green herb at all. Haha, I get the opposite of job minimization. Half of my church thinks that Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps means active duty Air Force service. No, Aunt Audrey, I'm not stationed anywhere yet. No, Pastor Ray, I don't have my AFSC yet. I have a year and a half to go. About 2 months before I graduated college, I was able to snag a job at the company my dad owns, being the administrative assistant. Obviously, this is a bottom-rung position in the business world, but you have to start somewhere to move your way up. I got my foot in the door because my dad owns the company, but I was hired and I'm supervised by a different person completely. Getting this position was a huge accomplishment for me. I was at a party my friend had invited me to when I was asked what I do for a living by one of my friend's friends. I was finally excited to answer the question because I'd finally started a professional career, like not being a server or cashier. My friend, however, didn't even let me answer and instead interrupted me by saying, "Oh, she just works for her dad." I still feel upset by this comment she made. She completely undermined my accomplishment and my job. I've since moved my way up in my career and now do HR for the company. I may have gotten into the company because of my dad, but I worked my way to where I am because of me. My girlfriend said that my organic chemistry work was just drawing pretty pictures and arrows. I'm a senior network security engineer for a global firm. We have several federal sites. Security clearances, you know. One of my uncles told me to keep at it and someday you'll be making good money. My salary was 6 figures when he told me this. I'm earning a Bachelor of Fine Arts. He goes to trade school, said my dad. I mean, that's just wishful thinking on his part. Okay, residential advisors, what's the most painful parent-student separation you've ever seen? There was one helicopter parenting situation. I'd left my phone number at a desk for a desk attendant one night I was on duty. A resident saw this, my personal number, and gave it to his dad. The dad calls me and immediately starts yelling that there's a leak in his son's bathroom ceiling and that wee-wee has been leaking through it. Okay, how long? For a week. Has he done anything about it? Notified anyone? You're the RA, you're supposed to know. The dad chews me out for 10 more minutes. I check out the kid's room. He's got towels all over the bathroom floor. I look up at the ceiling. Super light leak and definitely not wee-wee. I tell him so and tell him to file a maintenance request. He demands that I do it for him. I point him in the right direction, but he's a big boy, so no. He demands to know if what I know is water is actually wee-wee. I casually ask why he let what he thought was number 1 leak into his apartment for a whole week. As I go to leave, he tells me he's going to demand that the university pay for his ruined, read wet, towels, and he wants my contact info to file a complaint. I nod, give him the info, and I leave. His dad calls me a day later, but I'd spoken to my boss the night before. Hi, I'm calling on behalf of… Yes, I know, sir, but I'm an RA and I handle students' problems. If he wants my attention, he can call me himself, otherwise I don't report to you. Have a nice day, sir. Delete my number. The mum thought she'd be able to live with the daughter in the dorms. Upon being told that wasn't possible, she withdrew the daughter and they both went back home. I've been an RA for 3 years now. Every year, without fail, there's always that family that helps their kid move in on Sunday and then stays the entire freshman orientation week until school actually starts the next Monday. Except the freshmen obviously have activities to go through all throughout the week, so the parents, who can't accompany their kids to the activities, either sit around the kids' room or in the lobby of the dorm. It drives me crazy. Last year was particularly bad, with an entire family of mum, dad, siblings, cousins, all camped out in the dorm's lobby for a week. The university seemed to pick up on the fact that this is a problem, because this year they introduced a new event into the orientation week. A goodbye lunch specifically for parents to give them the hint it was time to leave. This really was a stealth helicopter parent story grouping, wasn't it? I'm sure there'll be others, but for now let's just focus on this whole frickin' helicopter family, including cousins. What the heck? Also, love the passive-aggressiveness of that university. Oddest story I had was one room that had two completely different roommates. Not like goth and yacht club, odd couple sort of thing, but two different away-from-home experiences. One had been in a boarding school for years and was laid back. The second was a homeschooler with drill sergeant dad and doting mother. The laid-back resident's parents didn't even show up. I asked him if he came alone, and he said his parents were in town, but wanted to avoid the chaos and would say goodbye tomorrow. Second resident almost seemed dazed when his parents left. His dad told him to stay in college, like an order, while mum cried and took forever to leave. The next day, I checked in on both. One was gone. The homeschooled one had moved out, drove a few hours, and had arrived at his house 20 minutes after his parents did. A fellow student in the dorm was from the same town and even the same church, which is how we found out. The parent of the remaining resident had showed up the next day, asked where their son's room was at. I told them and they thanked me, then asked if the freshmen had events planned or if they were free for dinner because they wanted to take their son and his new roommate out for dinner. In short, one resident, sheltered his whole life, couldn't last 24 hours away from extreme parents. Frickin' A. I had one of those living across from me, only it went on for an entire year. Excuse the wall of text. In New Zealand, practice is that you're only allowed in the dorms during your first year, or if you have a disability that living on campus will be helpful for. And we say halls of residence, or halls for short. Disabled students always get first dibs on the ground floor dorms. Internationals get self-catered kitchen dorms. Out-of-town New Zealanders get randomly given the leftovers, and lastly, the locals get what's left, if there's anything. And as my uni could only house slightly under 2,000 students but would get well over 4,000 applicants, very few locals ever got in. So the fact that my hallmate and neighbour managed to snag a room despite living a 30-minute drive away within the same city was surprising and impressive. Her national sports comps were probably what did it. Cut to night one in the halls. It's just after 4 a.m. I hear banging on my door. I unlock it, my hallmate sticks in her head, turns on my light, tosses me her key, tells me to watch her room and leaves. I only met her like 2 p.m. the previous day, so I was thinking, what the frick has she trusted me for? And she didn't even lock her door when she left. It was wide open, with almost everything still in it. At 5 a.m. in a building with 30 other people, many hungover or still drunk, who became the infamous building for door handle theft. My anxiety was through the roof. She came back just before lunch, got her keys, ate a salad, explained nothing, acted like an otherwise normal sane human who missed her folks like everyone else. Dinner comes, and afterwards she passes me her keys again and leaves. Leaves everything unlocked again, gives no explanation, even leaves her phone behind. And she did it again the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Right up until O-Week ended, by which time the whole building knew she slept at her parents' every night. I feel like I'm keeping some kind of dangerous secret by having the keys, but what can you do? She was a really good friend when she was around. During the semester, she'd stay in her room between classes, she'd eat at the lunch bar, hang out in the study space, sometimes she'd eat breakfast with us after being dropped off, but come dinner's end, I got her keys. She only actually slept in her room 5 times? I counted. It was such a frickin' waste of money, time, and someone else's spot. I still talk and study with her 3 years on, and she's fully and finally moved out now. She'll still give me her keys if she leaves on the weekend, despite now having roommates, a boyfriend, and her cousins living a few doors down who'd all be better candidates. I've just resigned myself to it, though I still don't know why I'm the chosen one. I'm too scared to ask at this point. More funny than sad or bad, but this happened when I was moving into the dorms in my freshman year. I'm the second child in my family, so my parents had already gone through it once. My dad saw another father on move-in day who looked like he was on the verge of tears. My dad, trying to be friendly to the stranger, went up to talk to him. "First kid going to college?" "No, it's just that I went to Michigan and my daughter's going to Michigan State. It's really hard for me." When I was an RA in 2014 through 15, one of my residents was 27 or 28 and was still having a hard time moving out of the house. But not because of her emotions. Her parents came over every night for dinner. They were over an hour away and they kept on trying to get her to drop out and move back home. It became really hard for her. It got to the point where she asked me and the other RAs to tell her parents that she was out when they came to see her. They got mad since the first time we had to tell them that. She didn't know what she was going to do after the school year ended, but that she didn't want to move back home. She just wanted to be free from them. My God, I mean, this sounds like a job for the witness protection program, or more realistically, an intervention by a therapist. Who am I kidding? If they've made it this far, it's going to take them a miracle to stop getting involved. A friend's dorm had the worst case of parent-student separation that I've ever seen. You see, there wasn't any separation. At least there wouldn't have been if the mother had had her way. The day after move-in, the girl's mother showed up in the middle of the day and asked for keys to the daughter's room. Yeah, no. Then she wanted someone to come with her upstairs and let her in. She was only there to get her daughter's dirty clothing. Why can't she do that? Still no. After 20 minutes of arguing, the woman left a note and told the poor guy at the front desk that it wasn't the last he'd heard from her, and insinuated that he was some kind of prevert or unspeakable act offender for covering the desk in a woman's dorm. She said he'd be lucky if firing and being kicked out of school was all that happened to him. When the student was informed, she seemed totally embarrassed, apologized for her mother, and said that it wouldn't happen again. 2 days later, the woman came back at 5:30 in the morning, shoulder-surfed the passcode to the building, and then, when her child wouldn't answer calls from the lobby phone, she snuck upstairs when one of the residents was leaving. She woke up the entire wrong floor of people by banging at the door to an empty room, and eventually got escorted out by my friend and public safety. But I just want to take my baby out for breakfast. How am I going to know she's eating right if I don't? I'm her mother and I pay for everything, so you can't make me leave. I'm going to sue you. You're trying to keep me from my baby. Public safety had to keep one of their staff in the lobby 24/7 for the next 3 weeks. It would have only been a few days, but scuttlebutt was that she tried twice more, including once in disguise. And by disguise, I mean sunglasses, a baseball hat, and a set of university sweats. Engineering school in the 1970s. A mum dropped her kid off at his dorm and drove away. Yep, pushed his suitcase and a few boxes out of the car, told Junior goodbye, study hard, and left. Junior was 15 frickin' years old, a super genius child prodigy with zero social skills. His roommates were horrified, but most of them had little brothers, so big brother parenting kicked right in. The kid was pretty well socialized by the end of the first semester and had a collection of de facto big brothers and big sisters helping him live his life. It was a relief because as a house counselor, I was really worried I was going to have a bad situation on my hands. I didn't need to do anything at all. I did buy the older guys beers a few times to thank them. I had to tell the parents of an 18-year-old freshman that I'm not allowed to key you into her room to set up a surprise party. Even if Mom is paying for the dorm, it's a legal thing. Mom was angry. She called her daughter, who then agreed we should have keyed them into her room because Mom is paying. Sorry, still not allowed. Their roommate talked to me privately. She's very pleased that we didn't let strangers in while she was doing the deed with her boyfriend, and that is why we have rules. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked in housing. I think the worst was the overprotective mother. She constantly called her son, who ended up not answering after the third call of the day. The mum would call his RA, who'd go into the student's room and tell him to call his mum. If he didn't do this, she called the RA again and had this on repeat. It hit its climax when the mother couldn't get her son or the RA on the line and called the office in a fit of panic that her son had done substances and died. Nope. He was just playing pool and ignoring his phone. I think the director of housing stepped in at that point and we didn't hear anything after that. This kid's mum left him a $100 Subway gift card for food. He sold it to another freshman for $20 to buy alcohol from an older student. He then proceeded to spend the next 2 weeks begging food and money from people. In addition, any legal issues or housing violations we had, this kid just happened to be around for them. Never really the perpetrator, but he always seemed to be there. Had a neighbor a couple of doors down in my freshman year that moved in and immediately started taking green herb in his room in the middle of the day with dozens of other freshmen and parents still milling around the floor moving stuff. My roommate and I walked by and tried to tell him to keep it on the down low, but someone had already called the cops. The guy got a possession and paraphernalia charge and had to go down to the station, then attend an academic council. He barely scraped by, but was able to stay. Sounds like the guy could have benefited from a little more helicopter parenting, to be completely honest, if only to knock the damn thing out of his hands until things quietened down. My RA time was in the early 90s. The worst I saw was a guy who cried for 4 days after his mum dropped him off. It was the first time he had been away from home and had been extremely sheltered and couldn't handle being alone. It took a while, but his roommate was friendly and a genuinely nice guy, and he helped him acclimate. The second wasn't necessarily separation issues, but a fight between a father and the roommate. His son was hetero, and he and the dad were both strict Christian and macho stereotypical jock types. He saw the posters that his roommate had up, mostly muscly men in Speedos and musical posters. They both went ballistic and started attacking the poor kid. He stood up for himself and they jumped him. It took me, the other RA, and 3 other guys from the floor to pull them off. We ended up kicking him out of the dorm and he was reprimanded by the university. This was over a decade ago. Mum and Dad moved their daughter onto my floor. Most parents arrive and leave within 3 to 4 hours. This family were one of the first to arrive at 8:30 when the doors opened, and they spent the morning decorating. I was busy, so I said, "Hi," and kept on trucking. They took their daughter out for lunch and got back at like 2 p.m. It's a very nice send-off so far. At 4 p.m., they were still there. The room was decorated, the daughter and dad were just awkwardly sitting there, not sure of what to do, but the mum was fussing back and forth around the tiny dorm room. At 6 p.m., I was rounding up anyone who wasn't already down for dinner to make sure the introverts didn't just hide in their rooms on the first night. This family was still sitting in this room together. So I said, "Hey, we're all going down for dinner. Ashley, would you like to join us?" Her mum answered, "Well, we're sort of getting set up here, so..." And seeing what was happening, I said, "Well, move-in hours expired an hour ago and we're a little strict about visitors, as I'm sure you can understand. Why don't you guys say your goodbyes and Ashley can meet us downstairs?" The mum non-committally said, "Okay, we'll see." But I had like 10 other people with me, so I couldn't wait around. I got back to my floor at 8 p.m. and they were still there, almost 12 hours now. I was trying to be polite and compassionate for the mum's sake, but I told them the parents would need a visitor's pass for staying the night if they wanted to stay longer. The mum didn't say anything to me but confirmed that she'd heard the message. About 20 minutes later, the parents left. I talked to Ashley and she said her mum was really overbearing. I introduced her to some of the other girls who might run in the same cliques, and she settled in really well after that. This mum ended up being my fricking nightmare for the first 2 months of that semester. Not an RA, but on the move-in day of my first year of uni, one of my 5 flatmates called us all into the kitchen to demand that we each let her 2 parents, 4 siblings, and 4 grandparents sleep in our rooms for the next week. The kicker? None of them would be staying in her room because she, quote, needed her space. Oh, and the other kicker, her family lives half an hour away from campus. They didn't want to be too far from her in case something happened. This was the first time I'd met her in person, and obviously we all said no to her demands. "How are you going to ensure that my daughter remains a virgin?" I can't do that, sir. That conversation will have to happen between you and her." Oh, I remember the nice dad who came to me asking if I'd seen the box of his daughter's handmade crafts and decorations. He was pretty sad. Someone must have picked it up accidentally, and I never saw it returned. This one is pretty wholesome, in the opposite direction of the worst. The mum was foreign, maybe Italian or Eastern European. She hugs her really tall son goodbye. You can tell it's a huge deal to her. She leaves, and I watch him walk towards his dorm with the biggest smile on his face. Favorite moment from move-in day. Not an RA, but I was involved in campus life and move-in. There's always several students who bring in all their stuff and bring it right back out 2 hours later because they aren't ready to leave. It honestly breaks my heart every time. I've seen one specific person do this 3 years in a row. I think she's living at home and taking community college classes now. We had one girl who lied to her family for months that she had a dorm room. She even showed up with her family and her things, and when we didn't have a room for her, she just broke down and sobbed. Like, holy heck, she had her family drive 8 hours north for this. I don't know how she endured that car ride. Oh hey, did you know my college roommate? It wasn't exactly the same circumstances, but one of my 2 roommates freshman year showed up on move-in day and set up her bed and desk and everything. She convinced her family she'd unpack the rest later, then she toured the campus with them and said goodbye. Then she grabbed the giant box of all the things she actually needed, clothes, toiletries, etc., and moved them to her boyfriend's house off campus where she stayed all year, while still paying for the dorm. It was absolutely bonkers to me that her family never apparently found out. Worked out for me though, I had the space of a triple while only having one roommate instead of two. Haha, well that's one way to get your conservative family off your back, I guess. I think whether or not we think this girl is being a manipulative monster probably lies in whether her family or her were paying, and whether she was forced to take this measure by oppressively traditional parents or not. It sounds like the relationship worked out though, at least for that year. Just yesterday, I had some parents who wanted to set up a webcam in the hallway in front of their daughter's room so that they could see when she got back and who was entering her room. Not an RA, but helpful with moving in every year I was at college. Free food, yay! Every day there'd be at least one family who brought a U-Haul, not just the trailer but the full truck, full of stuff that they, quote, can't live without. It was usually someone who was planning on pledging to a sorority and had boxes upon boxes of costumes. More often than not, they were moving into rooms where, after splitting the space with a roommate, they had less space than was in that truck. There was also the people who expected us to do everything for them. No, I don't know what room you're in, and no, I'm not hauling that full-size fridge up there for you. I was an RA for 3 years, and while this wasn't move-in day, it's probably the worst parent interaction I've ever had, and I worked in the school's conduct office as a grad student where parents would call angry because their precious angel broke housing policy. This kid was a sophomore, roughly about 20, and his parents moved him in at the beginning of the spring semester. I went door to door, welcoming residents back and welcoming new residents to the floor, and then I got to this kid's room. The parents were setting up everything for him, and he's standing in the corner just watching with a blank expression. I introduce myself, ask his preferred name, nickname, etc., and ask if there's anything I can do to help. Total silence, and his parents look at me like I'm the scum of the earth for talking to them. Flash forward maybe a month. The kid is having roommate problems, and so after some mediation, they decide to go separate directions, with the roommate moving into a different room in the building. So now, this kid lives alone. I should say that they had a busy schedule and friends in other buildings, so they weren't around much, which is what made this next part of the story very difficult. It was a Saturday morning, in probably February, so we weren't even that far into the semester, and who shows up but this kid's parents? Okay, cool. Coming to visit your kid is nice, right? Wrong. Kid wasn't answering his door, so the parents came and knocked on my door at 7:30 on a Saturday morning, demanding to know where he was. Not being his babysitter, I didn't know, but his parents had stuff for him and asked if they could leave it with me because they didn't want someone to steal it. Being the nice person I am, I agree, thinking, oh, it'll probably be a box of stuff. Again, wrong. 5 boxes of food, clothing, video games, and books later, the parents have left and told me to tell their kid to call them. Now, I go and knock on this kid's door every hour because I have to leave that afternoon and I'm getting no response. I call my supervisor and explain the situation, and we end up calling the campus police to do a wellness check because no one has seemed to have seen this kid in the past 24 hours. The kid finally comes back from the library, he slept there, and he's annoyed that we entered his room. Again, with the police present. Oh no, this isn't the last of it. Since I agreed to hold on to stuff for the parents that one time, every time they'd come to visit, every 2 weeks, and they lived 2 hours away, they'd bang on my door at an absurd hour to demand to know where their son was. At one point, one of my fellow RAs left the building to find the parents in the lobby, asking everyone who came by there where I was because I wasn't answering my door, and how would they know where their son was without me? Truly, the kids suffered from helicopter parents and just didn't like calling them. Go figure. This happened for the rest of the semester, and at move-out, they forgot and left their kid there until 10 p.m. when the dorms closed at 6, and the poor kid was just sitting on the sidewalk waiting for them. In short, I tried to be an accommodating RA, and parents mistook me as a babysitter for their 20-year-old son. When did you win by faking it until you made it? When I got my first construction job, I had to go buy a bunch of gear. Carhartts, which are heavy work pants, steel-toe boots, and a bunch of hand tools. The first thing I did when I got home was take the pants out to the garage and drag them through the dirt on the floor, stomp on them, rub some oil on them, and pull out a few threads. The steel toes got hit with a shovel and dirtied up, and the tools got their handles scraped and dirtied. I showed up on site with 2 other guys who looked like they were mannequins from the store. They got razzed for their shiny new gear, and they thought I knew what I was doing. Suckers. I went to Cheonan World Dance Festival in Korea, which includes a massive parade down the main street of the city. The best spot I could get where I could actually see was right at the end of the parade behind a fence. There was a grandstand there that was filled with VIPs, family of the mayors and officials of the sister cities. One of the guards came up to me and ushered me past the gate and brought me up into the grandstand and sat me right behind the mayor of Cheonan. Then they started passing around free samples of products made in or near Cheonan. Afterwards, they made everyone applaud the visitors and take pictures of us shaking hands with the mayor. I was so lost, but I just went with it because it was such a great time. My kids and I were in a touristy area of Mexico, and there was this fancy resort that had access to the beach. We weren't part of the resort, but they had really nice pools. We realized that the only things designating resort patrons were that they were all American and had specific towels. Well, we were already American, and then we got some discarded towels. We spent 2 full days hanging out at the resort. At one point, my daughter made friends with someone with a gold towel, so she got to use that. The gold towel got her all the free soda she could drink. Way back when I was 17, I was working at a conference at MIT, and I came across a packed lecture hall. They were showing the World Cup, and the hall was full of people rooting for Brazil. So I sat down and started cheering for Brazil, got instant acceptance. They started giving me beers, and I skipped work and got blasted, cheering for a team I had no connection to in a sport I didn't care about all day. It was so much fun. I like that a bunch of these stories are people getting into areas or situations to get ahead in life, but this guy just started cheering a sport he wasn't even interested in for free booze. I probably would have done it too in university, who am I kidding? While in high school, I went to Columbia University for some seminar on publishing. I was working on my school's art and literary magazine, and our supervisor thought that this would be a big help for us. After the seminar, I was wandering around, taking in the sights of this big, prestigious institution, when I came across a different seminar, this one for Columbia law students. I would have kept walking, except this seminar included a free lunch, pizza, and I was hungry. So I walked into the seminar, took a seat, and pretended to be a law student at Columbia University. I listened to the speakers for a bit, chatted very briefly with some of the other attendees, got my pizza, and got the heck out of Dodge. I managed to get some required immunizations after the health center closed by accident. I did the checkup thing, the doc told me I'd need to go downstairs and ask for vaccine 1 and vaccine 2, and that I'd be good to travel after that. I didn't know better, so I did exactly that. I walked down to the lobby, saw the sign for the lab I was directed to, and walked straight in to tell the tech back there exactly what I needed. The tech gave me the vaccines, and it wasn't until afterwards that I found out that A, they were closed, and B, you're supposed to make a separate appointment for that. The tech just assumed I was someone important because I didn't hesitate. Guy Gomer. This dude goes into BBC TV studios for a regular job interview. Gomer was waiting in the main reception area of the BBC television centre in West London to be interviewed for a job as a data support cleanser in the corporation's IT department. Unfortunately, he has the same first name as the guy being interviewed on the BBC News that day. Shenanigans ensue, he's interviewed for several minutes before the hosts realize he's not the right person, and he's gained a ton of pop culture notoriety and made a bunch of fun, paid television appearances since then. Years ago, I took a DSLR camera to a concert. When they told me I couldn't bring it in, I lied and said I was with the college newspaper and we were running a front-page story on the venue and I needed pictures. I talked to the event coordinator and she asked the band, and the next thing I knew, I had a press pass. That lie got me in the gap between the stage and security. I had no idea how to use that camera, but I faked it. Then I handed off the badge and the camera to my friends, and one by one, they faked it. That was a great time. For real? My job. On a rational level, I know that I'm good at it. I'm successful, popular with coworkers and my superiors, and people tell me they love my work on a regular basis. But I still have a serious case of imposter syndrome every other day. What am I doing here? I shouldn't be allowed to work here. I have no idea what I'm doing. Stop paying me for this and hire actual professionals. I went to a Flatbush Zombies concert and we got VIP passes, which effectively meant nothing. There was a second floor where the bands were hanging out and one lone security guard at the bottom of the stairs. We just briskly walked past him and held up our wristbands, and he didn't say anything. We used the same method to get on stage with all the bands and to sneak out the back door and smoke with him each. Walking to my bus on the way home from winter break, I realized I'd brought tickets for the wrong day, don't ask how, and after a brief call the company told me I couldn't do anything about it and it was the last day I was allowed to be on campus. Realizing I was stuck, I decided to just get on the bus anyway. The driver barely looked at my ticket before nodding me on, and I immediately got on and sat next to a friend and went to sleep to avoid suspicion. When I woke up, my friend told me that they'd overbooked and some people had to wait on a second bus. After I got home, I found out they'd left mine and a few other bags behind, so I had to call up again and negotiate having my bags sent for me and a few students who weren't fluent enough in English to negotiate for themselves. Luckily, after multiple speech checks and no one asking for my info, I made it home with all my stuff. And that's the story of how I stowed away on a bus. In short, no one ever questions a sleeping person on a bus. Being an artist manager, it felt like I had to act like I belonged every single day when I was just starting out. Meetings, phone calls, emails, everything. It felt like I needed some sort of confidence and D-bag attitude I didn't think I had. It felt weird trying to be someone else at work every day. When I was in Croatia, I walked into an aquarium where a German school group of about 16 to 18-year-olds were waiting for their teacher to pay them in. I was only 19 at the time, so I just stood amongst them like an inconspicuous penguin, and once we were shuttled in by our tour guide, I flaked off to look at some turtles. Despite being 6'2", I'm consistently good at blending into crowds to the point of being invisible pretty much without trying. I've accidentally walked into the wrong party before and stayed there for a few hours, when in reality I was invited to the one next door. Huh, real-life invisible man here. I wonder how you didn't realize that you didn't know anyone or that the person who invited you wasn't there either. Wild. When I was in college, parking was hell to find during football games, and often you had to park over a mile away. They also wouldn't let you near the stadium unless you were faculty or a cop. However, at the time we had construction going on, and lots of people were driving large white trucks just like the truck I had. Seeing this, I took it upon myself to try my limits and try to get on campus without being stopped. 9 times out of 10 it worked, and I could park right outside the stadium. You can go anywhere you want if you have a clipboard, safety vest, and hard hat. And if nothing else works, a ladder. I'm a massive, lifelong Star Wars fan, so when The Last Jedi premiered, I leapt at the chance to go. The problem was, it was on a weekday, and while I took a Ferris Bueller day, none of my friends did. Additionally, I had a migraine in the morning of, so I ended up arriving quite late at the venue at 10 a.m. I was still quite zonked out from the migraine and subsequent medication, and was hustling towards the queue, occasionally asking workers if I was going in the right direction. They all confirmed that I was, and it was just around the corner. Eventually, I arrived at what I thought was the end of the queue, as there were people waiting around in costume, and I settled in for the long wait. A few hours later, it was time to move into the venue, and I'm stoked. I get up and eagerly follow the people in front of me, who I now realize are in wheelchairs, and are wearing Star Wars wristbands, and are actually first in the queue. I'm not in a wheelchair, I do not have wristbands, but I am in front of the queue. Oh, crap. Thoughts of the IT crowd filled my head, and in an instant my anxiety kicked in. I could feel the panic attack rising in me as I trudged behind them, awaiting the order to go to the back of the queue, which at that point meant I probably wouldn't get in. I debated just booking it to the nearest alleyway to have my shame-induced panic attack in private, when I noticed I was part of the group instead of behind them. I started panicking even more and tried to move, but to no avail. We had just passed through the gates and I was officially in the premiere. I stood inside the gates for a moment, debating whether or not I should leave out of pure guilt, when the group I pretended to be part of sped past me cheering. No comments on how I was clearly not disabled, no one stopped me to check for a wristband. I don't know if that group hated me and was ignoring me, didn't care about one person cutting the queue, or if they were actually helping. All I know is that it was one of the greatest nights of my life, seeing some of my childhood heroes and experiencing the magic of Star Wars in a whole new way. All thanks to a group of disabled people that didn't rat me out. In short, real life, I'm disabled moment. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Back in 2006, I went to Lollapalooza and there was an after-party that my favorite band was playing at. My friend and I didn't have tickets, so we just went up to the back door of the venue. I whispered to my friend, "Act as if, like from the movie Boiler Room," and he says, "Okay," and just follows my lead. So we follow a band member in saying, "Hold the door please," and they did, thinking that we worked there and we're just out for a smoke. We ended up walking up the stairs and watching the band on stage. No idea how we didn't get caught and kicked out, but that might have been one of the coolest things, act as if, ever got someone. Ended up on the same flight home as the band after that too, coincidentally. I didn't really participate in any after-school clubs besides playing a sport. One day they were taking club pictures for the yearbook, so me and my buddy just decided to jump in every club pic that they were taking. Ended up being in choir, band, advanced French, ultimate frisbee, and future teachers of America, to name a few. Would have been in the robotics club, but we did get ratted out by that point. Princeton reunion. Lived in Princeton, New Jersey for a while. Everyone kept talking about the reunion. Apparently every year they throw a massive drinking party on campus. You need a wristband to get in, but there's plenty of old alums in the area that get them and don't want them. My brother's friend scored a couple, and with some careful passing back and forth, we all managed to get in. This party was wild. Like flash your wristband, here's a free beer. They were tossing empty kegs into a mountain-sized pile like you might do with a can in a backyard barbecue. People were drunk and very friendly, until you told them you were from Kansas and didn't go to Princeton. Then you were a pleb and very quickly dismissed. So screw it, we just started making stuff up. "Yeah, boy, what are you in? Me? Eastern linguistics. Astronomics. Oh, okay, let's get another beer." I had so many made-up degrees that by the end of the night I was having trouble keeping them straight because I'd keep rerunning into people from before. I also peed in a lot of weird, shady corners all over campus that night. Turns out people at Princeton aren't necessarily the smartest people in the world, but they sure are nice if they think you're part of their fancy club. They throw one hell of a party though. Last weekend we got the train to London and jumped in the first open table in first class and enjoyed the free tea and Wi-Fi. It helps that the ticket guy didn't come around, but none of the staff cared enough to say anything. I landed a cushy GS11 position, and I still don't feel like I really know all of this stuff well enough to be here. I just act confident and pretend to know what's going on. I suspect everyone else is doing the same thing. This is government work after all. I was at the South by Southwest Gaming Expo in Austin, Texas. There was an area full of really high-tech gaming computers, and I saw other people casually playing. When a computer finally opened up, I sat down and soon a game of PUBG begins. It turns out it was a tournament and I'd taken someone else's seat. There were people crowding around to watch over our shoulders, and an announcer started talking. I'd never even played the game before, and I didn't do very well. These guys trained all the time, and I'd never even so much as launched the game. This is the natural result, but the narrator does know of a similar but different story of another spontaneous tournament gamer. I think he was an Aussie guy who ended up winning in a low-level Command & Conquer 3 tournament, and ended up going to a higher level for a while. But that individual actually was a strategy pro gamer, just one who'd never played that particular game. A friend got me a job when I was 17 doing graphic design. This particular position required more than 3 years of experience and an understanding of pretty much every Adobe program. He lied when vouching for me and basically said, "If anyone asks, you're 20 and you know exactly what you're doing. If you have any questions about what to do, ask me." Prior to that, I'd done maybe 3 or 4 graphic design projects as freelance gigs, but I was still very new to it. That job worked out a lot better than it should have, no one asked too many questions, and it helped me realize that even though I was doing graphic design as a hobby, doing it for work hurts my soul. When I was studying abroad in Costa Rica, my friend who was a rugby player back in the States wanted to go to this rugby practice he randomly found out about while talking to a guy who was on this team. Next thing I know, my skinny white butt was being hauled along so he didn't have to go alone. I was in a legit club rugby practice that's all in Spanish, and I barely spoke any at this point, trying to do my best to fit in with all of these hulking, terrifying-looking rugby players. Luckily, I've participated in my fair share of sports practices growing up, so I was able to figure out what the drills were just by watching them, and was able to run through practice kinda like I knew what I was doing. Eventually, I was paired up with this one huge beast to do tackling drills. I think he might have figured out my ruse, so he took it easy on me and taught me some basics. He was really cool. Went on to find out afterwards that this team was playing in something like the Latin American Club Rugby Championships, and that player was the best rugby player in Latin America. Go figure! I started at my current employer about 15 years ago. The manager of my department was this awful guy with no management experience. I filled the gaps to make do. One day he just announced he was going to focus on other tasks. Nobody thought to actually designate a new manager, so one day I just started doing all management's tasks. Another day, sometime later, I just started putting manager on my business cards and email tags. Nobody questioned it. A couple of years later, after I'd started seeing the need for better global coordination, I just started using global manager as my title. Again, no one asked anything. A couple of years ago, I upgraded to global directory of, and I was given several raises and nobody ever said, "No, you're not." And that's how I became a director in a global enterprise software company. Was taking some pictures in a city when I stumbled upon an outdoor fashion show which was free to visit, but had an area in front of the runway for photographers. So with my not-so-professional-looking gear, I went into that area, not knowing it was meant for real professionals who had signed up for it beforehand. I still don't know how I got in there without anyone noticing. Maybe it's because I was there very early and the organization wasn't up to speed yet. Other amateur photographers that tried to get in were turned away. I had crap gear, the wrong lens and everything, but no one questioned my presence. I had a blast trying out runway photography in that pretty crowded area. It must have looked like I belonged there because I wasn't kicked out. I moved to Columbus, Ohio in 2006 to start a new IT contracts job for a fairly large company. I'd been there exactly 2 weeks when a woman walked up to my cubicle and popped her head in. "Hey, the lunch is starting, we should head in," she said, giving me the thumbs up and obviously expecting me to follow her. I had no clue who this woman was, what this lunch was, but I was new in town and I knew nobody. I was happy to head to a lunch with other people. We walked to a large conference room that was filled with chairs facing a podium, tables full of yummies and a ton of people, so I just got in line and grabbed some food. I knew nobody in there, but it quickly became clear that a lot of people there were strangers to each other and were from different departments. Handshakes and introductions were going around, and I just went with the flow. I introduced myself, said I was a contractor. I learned this was a good catch-all for not specifying what department you worked in, and I filled my plate with some great food. I sat down in one of the chairs, and for the next hour I listened to people talk about the new product and how it all worked so hard to implement it. How we all did such a great job and how the upper management was extremely proud of us. In the end, they had us get together for a large group photograph. I was right in front, dead center. Afterwards, there was a sign-in sheet that asked for our name and our supervisor. I filled it out, grabbed some food to go, and headed out. Over the next few months, I received updates in my email about the project, received an award that was delivered to my cube, received a couple of certificates for my accomplishments that I'd never accomplished, and was invited to a dinner a year later for the anniversary of the launch. I didn't want to push my luck on that one. It turns out that when I was brought on board to do my job, the department I was connected to didn't have any room, and I had to sit in a cube belonging to another department. It was assumed that I belonged to that department by others, and nobody really questioned it. My favorite thing about the whole group photo was that it was blown up and hung in the main lobby with other group photos, so I'll forever be a part of the group that I was never part of, and damned proud of it. When I visited India in 2013, we went to the Taj Mahal. Now, at the time, they had 2 rates to get in, a cheap rate for Indians and a pricier rate for foreigners. I think it equated to something like 20 pence for Indians and £7 for foreigners. They could normally spot who was a foreigner by clothing, way of speaking, and they also had checks to make them pay for the higher rate. I was with my mum, dad, and brother. They had lines separated by gender, so I went with my mum, and dad and brother went together. My dad wanted us to get in at the lower rate if we could because he wanted to save some money or something. Now, my mum is originally from India herself, so she knows how to fit in, and she got me and herself to pay the lower rate. My dad wasn't so successful. Him and my bro aren't originally from the country, even though his parents are. So he and my bro paid the higher rate. We got to the front of the Taj Mahal and I realized there were 2 queues to get in. The one for those who'd paid the lower rate was maybe 3 hours long, and it was 4 p.m. or so at this point. Then there was the shorter queue for those who'd paid the higher rate, which was maybe about 15 minutes wait, tops. We had 2 lower rate tickets and 2 higher rate tickets between the 4 of us, and they were quite distinctive in color. My dad decided he wanted us to all try to get in together on his and my brother's tickets. There was a security guy yelling at a guy in front of us who was trying to jump into the shorter queue on lower rate tickets, so my dad waved the 2 higher rate tickets he had in front of the security guy, who at that point said something along the lines of, "Look at these high rate tickets, this is what you need to get in the shorter queue." And he started waving us through, so we took that as a cue to get into the shorter queue. Had a blast of a time. When did a mansplainer get shut down? About a year into our marriage, we bought a dining table and chairs, our first real furniture. My wife was so happy that she posted the pictures on Facebook and wanted her mum to look. Her mum commented on the phone that it was a nice oval table. My wife is upset. "You didn't look." "Yes, I did. It's not oval, it's rectangular." "No, it's an oval. I looked." My wife finally gets her mum to go look. Her mum sees that she's incorrect and creates this gem. "Well, that's what I call an oval." "You mean you call rectangles ovals?" This has become a running gag to us. Whenever we lose an argument, we always end it with, "Well, that's what I call it." Was at the zoo. I said it was crazy that there are penguins in South Africa. My friend says I'm wrong and that there aren't any in Africa because it's way too hot for them there. I told him the only reason I brought it up is because we were literally at the African penguin exhibit. And the guy who insisted I was pronouncing my own name wrong. I was in class once where my classmate said his last name was Osborne, and some guy kept arguing, "I'm pretty sure it's Osborne." He got angry and yelled out, "I'm pretty sure I know how to say my last fricking name." Funny stuff. I was a stay-at-home dad for my 2 daughters. My youngest was a toddler at the time. Had a lady tell me that I had no business bathing my children because I was male and my kids were female. I welcomed her to the 21st century and told her to mind her own frickin' business. I was the person who needed correcting, actually. In grade 2, I explained to my entire class, as pretentiously as a 7-year-old could, that the singular of sheep is shoop. My logic was the singular of geese is goose, and that rule must apply to sheep as well. I still remember the other kids looking at me like I was dropped on my head as a baby. Yeah, the English language is inconsistent as all heck. That's what you get when you jam a whole bunch of other, also inconsistent languages together over the course of a millennium and then let it develop by itself. Senior kindergarten, I had an activity for Mother's Day to color some pre-printed cards with 3 tulips. The teacher told us to color them red, yellow, and orange. 6-year-old me colored one purple because I didn't like orange. My teacher told me I was wrong and to redo it because purple tulips don't exist. I told my mum when I got home. She cut the purple tulip out of our garden, and I took it into class the next day to prove my teacher wrong. Someone corrected me on my gender once during a phone call. I have a gender-neutral name, and people screw it up online all the time. "Hello, could I speak to the name, please?" "Yep, this is she." "No, they're a man." I gave him a moment of silence to sort himself out while I wheezed with trying to hold back my laughter. "What language is the most spoken in the world?" I said, "Chinese, probably, I think." "Well, no, it's Portuguese. Everyone knows that, idiot." "Vietnam is a war, not a country. A war that the US won." A guy told me he went to Nice for holiday. I said the south of France is a beautiful place. The guy laughs and tells me Nice is in Italy, but it's an easy mistake to make. I'm too shocked to respond. How the frick do you go on holiday and not know what country you're in? I was playing a pickup soccer match and I said something about scoring a goal directly from a corner kick. This guy immediately corrects me and says that goals directly from a corner don't count. He was absolutely adamant and talked about how he's played the sport his whole life and that it doesn't count at any level of the game. He's completely wrong. My mother-in-law is convinced that The Hobbit is a 2-book series. I've tried to disabuse her of this notion, including by showing her Wikipedia and copies of the book available on Amazon. She wouldn't have it. Eventually, the argument became heated and we had to agree to disagree. I still bring it up to my wife because it bugs her. I was arguing with my ex and I told her that I'm allowed to converse with anyone I'd like. She stopped the argument to tell me that the word is conversate and not converse. My mum. She had mental health problems and would express and insist on bizarre truths when she was ill. My boyfriend at the time came over. He said his parents were going to Hawaii. I said that I always wanted to visit an island in the Pacific. My mum asked if I was stupid. Hawaii is in Africa. She sounded the letters out extra long for emphasis. I just said I must have forgotten that and did my best not to laugh. My boyfriend became indignant and despite my frantically waving "no," proceeded to try and correct her and say that I was right. That didn't go over very well. I spent the next half hour in private trying to explain to him what delusions are. It was extra tricky because she was very intelligent. People just didn't expect the crazy. But when she cycled, oh boy could she come up with some humdingers. It was actually easier as she aged and her hair went grey. People understand dementia so they weren't caught so flat-footed, and they'd respond to her with less indignation and more understanding. It made it easier for me to look after her as she aged. I never took offense to the stuff she said because I knew her control over these things ebbed and flowed. When I was in kindergarten, I told all of the other kids that the word dumb was spelt D-U-M without the B at the end, because in one of the Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote cartoons, Bugs said, "And mud spelled backwards is dumb." The teacher tried to correct me, but I was insistent and eventually burst into tears because I'd just seen the cartoon that weekend, damn it, Miss Howley. We were at the beach and my wife was putting sunscreen on our toddler. A woman sitting close to us rolled her eyes and said to my wife, "That boy doesn't need sunscreen. Helicopter parents raise soft children. Ridiculous." We're pretty far from overprotective parents, so it caught us off guard for sure. Apparently, you can't raise a tough kid unless you give them the chance to develop skin cancer. Wow, gotta say that one has never come up in our Helicopter Parents series. Maybe if the narrator searched the submitted stories far enough, he'd find this lady complaining about the ridiculous fools pampering their children by protecting them from the sun. I was working as a receptionist on summer break from college. One day, a woman with a tired, Midwestern, middle-aged voice called from a potential vendor's office to ask for our mailing address. So I rattled off, 60 West 26th Street, Suite 400. She stops and asks me to repeat, so I do. She stops me again and asks in this faux puzzled way, "So that's SWEET 400. I reply with innocent earnestness because I think somehow I haven't been clear that it's sweet SUITE. She responds with this incredulous yet delighted laugh that goes on for what seemed like 5 minutes. "Dear, that word you just spelled isn't pronounced sweet," she said like she was talking to a 5-year-old that had just failed kindergarten. "It's pronounced suit." I thought she had to be joking, or I still haven't made myself clear, so I actually say, "No, sorry, I wasn't clear. It's sweet, you know, like a suite of officers." She then sighs wearily like she just can't believe what she has to deal with and levels with me. "Look, I feel bad for telling you this, but you're making a complete fool out of yourself every time you say your office address. I know you're going to be embarrassed, but when you get off the phone with me, go find a dictionary and have someone else explain to you how to pronounce the word. It's probably not your fault, it's your parents probably, giving you no schooling and you were badly educated so you don't know any better, but if you don't want to be fired, you'll do as I say for your own good." She then proceeds to make me say the address again, insisting I pronounce sweet as suit, and not allowing me to continue if I say it correctly. So I mutter my way through it and she finally gets off the phone after telling me that I'd thank her one day. I just kept wishing she had inadvertently put the phone down wrong so it didn't disconnect, because I was pretty sure the next sentence out of her mouth to anyone within ears in her office would have been, "My God, you wouldn't believe that idiot I just spoke to. She kept telling me her office suite number. I didn't know what she was talking about, so I made her spell it out for me because I wasn't previously aware a human being could be so stupid as to pronounce SUITE as sweet when anyone with half a brain knows it's pronounced suit. Why oh why did they give morons jobs? Only to have everyone around her go, wondering if they should be the one to break the news and weather the storm. My first week as a freshman in college literature class, I referred to the peonies mentioned in a story, and my classmate said, "It's pronounced ponies." I looked doubtful and said, "Really? I'm pretty sure it's just peonies." She went on a bit of a rant about how her grandmother grew them and she knew all about them. Not everyone at a good university is necessarily all that bright. My little brother, then aged 8, read a neighborhood flyer about a pool party and pronounced hors d'oeuvre as horse d'oeuvre. My friend, who was a know-it-all at 16, laughed in a really exaggerated way and said, "I can't believe you just pronounced horse d'oeuvre as horse d'oeuvre." I hope that makes sense. I still make fun of her for that. A few weeks ago, I was stung by a bee in a theme park and the stinger wouldn't come out. I started getting a really bad rash from the venom, and the first aid lady laughed at me and said it wasn't coming from the bee sting because venom? Bees don't have venom. And she refused to give me any tweezers to help get the stinger out because I was acting like a baby. Probably when I was 5 years old and just starting school. My first name used to be one commonly spelt with a Y at the end, however mine was actually spelt with an I at the end instead. I wrote my name down and my teacher kept telling me that I'd spelt it wrong and we both argued and got very frustrated with each other. She was very embarrassed when another teacher put her in her place for shouting at me to the verge of tears when I'd actually spelt my name correctly. My girlfriend tried to convince me it was spelt phalanges with an F and not phalanges with a PH. She's really nice though. I had a teacher once correct my spelling of wolves, plural, to wolfs. This was an English teacher, and the editor of the school newspaper for which I was writing. She was the regular English teacher while I was in AP, so I wasn't familiar enough with her to realize that she was a blithering idiot. She also preferred to spell the plural of elf as elfs rather than elves. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My dad adamantly refused to believe that narwhals are real. I had to show him not just photos but videos of narwhals before he finally believed me. In all fairness, they're maybe the fakest animal that exists. They look like they're drawn by a 5-year-old. Also, did you know that the horn is just one tooth that's really long and comes through their lip? So it's not even in the center. It's enough to drive a person crazy. In 5th grade health class, I said that it wasn't true that gum takes 7 years to pass through your digestive system. My teacher then said that it's very dangerous to swallow gum because in your stomach you have an organ that, quote, mashes up your food, and when you swallow gum it gets stuck to that organ. She then said that eventually if you swallow too much gum you'll no longer be able to digest food. Is it that hard to tell kids about stomach acid? Okay, the narrator didn't know that stomach acid can actually break down chewing gum until this story made him go on a Google trip. So, folks, you heard it here first. Don't go swallowing that stuff because it's still not exactly easy on your tummy, and apparently it can stick together and snowball if you do it all the time, but it's not the end of the world if you accidentally gulp it in shock once in a while. I had a really self-assured science teacher. Here are some highlights. They told us that Harambe was shot for trying to eat a child, told us that gorillas were carnivores. When asked why, she said that no animal that big can survive off plants. Lady, you talked about dinosaurs. One of our subs had nicknames that she liked being called. One of them was Wicked Witch of the West, because she was very nice and not witch-like at all. Our science teacher told us which sub we'd have before she arrived, and one of our students said, "Oh, the Wicked Witch!" And that student got detention. When the sub arrived, we all made a point to greet her as the Wicked Witch. If that didn't shock the teacher, then the sub's delight at us remembering her nickname from 3 years ago was show-stopping. She told us that people in Florida didn't have basements, my aunt lived in Florida and had a basement, and told us that the school handbook prevented us from having our phones not shut all the way down. It said no such thing. And finally, a student asked how fast the Earth revolved. The teacher said flatly, 1 year. The student rephrased the question, realizing what he was asking and what the teacher thought he'd asked were different. He asked at how many miles per hour the Earth spun on its axis. 1 year, barked the teacher. 3 or 4 different people tried to explain the question, and one got sent to the hall. This lady was mid-40s and adamant that we weren't allowed to fact-check her. A student got detention from Googling the Harambe incident because she was supposedly out of area on her laptop. An adult woman, somewhere between 18 to 21, tried to fiercely argue with me, a 17-year-old boy, that women didn't have urethras and that they went number 1 from their fun bean. I ran into our local vet and her very religious younger sister. As the vet and I talked, her sister looked out into the store parking lot and saw an old man staggering to his truck. The little sister said very primly, "There, but for the grace of God go I." I said, "Actually, he's a very well-respected man." She replied, "He's obviously drunk before noon." "No," I said, "he has MS. He's my father and your sister's pastor." The big sister had the grace to look embarrassed. My dad when he corrected me about how sugar causes health problems. My explanation is the whole fat storage, insulin resistance, diabetes thing. And his? His is that when you eat sugar, its rough edges nick the insides of your veins and arteries, roughing them up and making things catch on all of the nicks, leading to blood clots, strokes, and myriad other problems. He still also believes that blood is red, blue, and black. He's got a whole host of weird health facts. He's like the walking, talking version of those old medical catalogs that sell bizarre and outlandish products that don't work for serious ailments. I love him to death. I adore him enough to have him come live with us. But we do just shake our heads sometimes. I said to my mum in a conversation about World War II that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, but she said, "That's wrong, North Korea did that." At my little sister's confirmation, I was her sponsor. I was 18, she was 14. The woman next to me got all nasty because I was nodding off and she said I should be ashamed and I was being disrespectful. What she didn't know was that I had end-stage liver failure and had hepatic encephalopathy. Plus, I was on a lot of pain medication. Afterwards, I told my mum about it, sponsors were seated separately from parents, and she was angry. She cornered this witch in the bathroom and just reamed her. Witch lady skulked out very quickly after that. Glad to say a year later I got my transplant and I'm now healthy and doing great, turning 27 in 10 days. Warning, cringy and also infuriating. My grandmother has Alzheimer's. I was explaining it to a few people when this girl in my class butts in and states that 1. Alzheimer's doesn't exist, only dementia exists, and 2. Alzheimer's is like crippling autism. It took all of my strength not to punch her into the next universe. I felt incredibly insulted and was understandably furious. Everyone was shocked at how rude and misinformed she was. It should be obvious by this point that the narrator is using mansplain to mean patronizingly explain a concept, and I think it works. This girl is just as annoying as any other proponent of, well, actually. I'm planning a game night between friends. One friend is not part of my usual circle and questioned why I needed a vegetarian pizza. Another friend is a vegetarian. I don't know the small differences between vegan or veggie, and I explained that it was for her. Also, the veggie pizza is amazing. The out-of-circle friend, being a smug F-word, pointed out that pizza has cheese. Well, yeah, but the veggie friend is okay with milk and eggs as it doesn't kill the animal. And new guy is off. Eating eggs is murder. I say, what? It doesn't kill chickens to lay eggs. It kills the baby chicken. Oh God, man. Goodness gracious me. I did correct him, and he did accept the correction, but he was so excited to poke holes in my friend's diet just because of the vegetarian thing. Alaska isn't a state, it's a continent. Well, actually, the slaves didn't have it all that bad. The plantation owners took pretty good care of them because they paid good money for them, said my father-in-law. Both my husband and myself were speechless. I kind of still am. I said, I prefer vacations in some more mountainous areas than tropical, since I'm pretty scared of the ocean, sharks especially. My sister? Just go somewhere where sharks don't go, like Hawaii. Duh. My husband and I were having a party at our house. I'm a historian and have tons of old and unique things from around the world. A woman was looking at my collection of maps from around the place. I have a copy of the first map of the world and she asked why the edge was wavy. I told her the map maker knew the Earth was round and decided to make the edge wavy for accuracy. But the Earth is flat, says the lady. We're not friends anymore. First class in school, so I was around 7 or 8, and I remember we were doing fruit and I said tomato. My teacher ridiculed me, saying it was a vegetable, and everyone laughed at me. I knew I was right but said nothing. Screw that saggy old bag. Reading all of these makes me irrationally angry. I have to go. When I was in first grade, they taught us to read Goofy Goes to Cuba, and it talked about how he saw a bunch of alligators. I raised my hand. There's no such thing as a Cuban alligator. The teacher said, obviously there are. That's not true. Are you calling me a liar? No, just uneducated. I got kicked out of the classroom. I was so mad. That weekend, I got my mum to take me to the Louisville Zoo where I spoke to the reptile zookeeper and got him to write a letter and sign it for me. I brought it back to class the next Monday, and the teacher still said that the reptile keeper, the specialist on the subject, might be mistaken. Why? Because Goofy Goes to Cuba said so. Frick. I was at a hair salon with my mother years ago. We started to talk about the movie Django because we'd both recently watched it. Then this random girl next to us says, "It's pronounced Django." We both just looked at her first off for being rude and interrupting our conversation, but also for saying Django wrong and trying to correct us. I looked at her and said, "The D is silent." Peer reviewing in high school, which is fine until you take a non-honors English course and other kids can't spell. I'm an English major, and in high school I knew I wanted to be an English major in the future, so you'd better believe I had a solid frickin' grasp on spelling and grammar. I can understand minor, uninformed corrections, but this one made me angry. I believe the sentence I wrote was something along the lines of, "He was definitely lying." Definitely was spelt correctly with 2 I's. My sentence was corrected to, "He is lying," with lying spelt wrong, with a question mark by my spelling of definitely that pointed to a note on the side that said, "That's not a word. Did you mean defiantly?" I swear I've never been angrier in my life. A foreign student at my crappy community college randomly started lecturing me on the differences between where and were after I asked where I should go to make up a test. Unfortunately, he didn't really understand English as well as he thought, and he had mixed them up. He thought I should have asked, "Where do I go to make up the test?" There were a few other students around and none of them had the heart to stop him, so he went on condescendingly for a while about grammar while I just stood there confused and kind of annoyed at his audacity. He finally ended it by saying, "It's okay, you'll get it eventually," as if he'd just explained some super complicated crap. I never bothered correcting him on it, but I wonder if he looks back and cringes about how hard he failed to correct someone on their own native language. My friend asked, "Are your niece and nephew identical or fraternal twins?" I said, "Well, they're a boy and a girl, so obviously they're not identical." "That's not true. Boy and girl twins can be identical." Another friend chimed in, "I know it sounds weird, but it's true. If the zygote splits, they're identical. If there are 2 zygotes, they're fraternal." And I said, "Yes, but the zygote has 13 chromosomes from the father and 13 from the mother. You're telling me all the chromosomes are the same except one has an I and one has an X. That makes no sense." Friend number 2 corrected and said, I didn't think of that." The first one kept Googling but realized she was wrong. I mean, I know I didn't do too well in high school biology, but come on. When did a goofy army recruit nearly break their drill sergeant? I had one recruit paying attention to a bunch of geese rather than us. I made him get up and chase them all away. As they flew in the air, we made him follow them for several hundred feet to make sure they wouldn't come back. I was dying of laughter on the inside. I can pass along a classic boot camp story. I was in the Navy, and in the Navy, your final inspection as a division is before the division officer, or DO, which is usually some junior officer nobody that got assigned that job, but we didn't know that at the time. Anyway, before the inspection, one of our RDCs, or the recruit division commanders, that's what we call the division officer in the Navy, found a locker out of sorts and decided to beat us in our dress blues. That was not fun, let me tell you. Wool uniforms. If we lost our cover, we'd get beat more. It was bad. Anyway, the DO rolls in for inspection, walks up to the first guy in formation, and the guy chucks up. However, this guy is a frickin' genius. He chucked up down the t-shirt in his dress blues, saving the DO from the chunks and us from getting beat even more. The division officer was so impressed at this guy's military bearing that he called the inspection right then and there. A grade of 5-star sailors all round. We still got beat that night, but that one dude was our chucking hero. Standing in formation at Fort Knox, about to head to the range, and everyone needed their gloves. One private comes out without them and the drill sergeant screams, "Private, where the frick are your gloves?" In this thick Tennessee accent he goes, "Well, damn, drill sergeant, I must have done left them son witches up in the stairs." The drill sergeant then just collapsed in tears of laughter. At boot camp, it was time to bunk down, and one of the division commanders showed up and was doing a walkthrough. It was just before lights out. He was going through the head, and then there was a loud scream of, "Oh my god, he's just cranking it over here! Get your frickin' Johnson out of your hands and out of my sight! Why the frick is your Frankfurter staring at me, recruit?" Lights out did not happen as scheduled, and I still talk to the guy who got caught many years later. He was also my bunkmate. Huh. A division commander in another division asked a guy if he'd shaved that morning, and the guy claimed he had. The division commander said, "Recruit, you are either a werewolf or you're lying, so which is it?" And the guy responded with, "I must be a werewolf, petty officer." Most of these are even funnier when you remember that the encounters are shortly followed by the poor recruit in question being screamed at and forced to run for a very long time afterwards. I was going through Air Force basic training, and when on guard duty, if an unauthorized person wanted to be let into the bunks, you had to report it to your drill sergeant. Our sister flight's drill sergeant came up while I was on guard and requested entry, so I reported to my sergeant and he had me ask the other a series of questions. This particular sergeant had a bushy mustache, so one question I had to ask was, in what year was Magnum PI cancelled? He dropped out of view from the window laughing, came back up and yelled, "It was never cancelled because I'm still here!" It took everything I had not to crack up. So when you start basic, your body doesn't know how to handle no sugar, caffeine, rigorous exercise, and sleeping schedules, so it's in shock. With this shock, crapping becomes a problem for a few people. Well, every DI after the first week is required to ask around if everyone has gone number 2, and from there he assigns one recruit to track who's gone number 2 and who hasn't. I crap you not, pun intended, we had one guy who'd stand in the barracks at the end of the night rolling off names of people who hadn't gone number 2 yet. Finally, we had another guy who's still on there after 2 weeks, and the drill instructor tells him to go to the doctor. The doctor gives him a get-out-of-jail-free card, essentially saying that at any point, if he says the magical words, "I've gotta go," he can escape any situation. Well, recruit No-Twosies, we'll call him, gets the smart idea that he's going to play his new trump card as long as possible. Every time we're getting grilled, it's, "I gotta go," ringing in from the back of the formation. This probably happened 6 times until our drill instructor caught on. Finally, the DI devises a plan that when recruit No-Twosies goes to the bathroom, he's going to have a couple of us hold onto his legs and slide him into the stall, exorcist style. The time comes and recruit No-Twosies excuses himself, we all follow our DI into the bathroom, and slide him under there like he's the spawn of Satan. This catches recruit No-Twosies by surprise. He doesn't know what the frick is going on as the DI is utterly berating him about lying and using this as an excuse to sit on the loo. Then we hear a very audible, "Oh, crap," from the stall. The DI scared the recruit so much he actually went twosies right then and there. The DI then made every recruit look at it and we played taps for it as we flushed it down the toilet. While in basic, we had a female that loved to smile. She was just a happy person in general. Well, my TI, or training instructor, came in and she caught the female trainee smiling. TI didn't like smiling. She walked up to the female trainee and yelled, "Wipe that smile off your face." The female trainee stopped smiling. The TI continued to yell, "No, literally wipe the smile off your face with your hand." The trainee does so. "Now throw it on the ground." Trainee follows orders. "Now stomp on it and scream, 'Die, smile, die' as loud as you can." The female trainee stood there for a few seconds before following through. Her tiny little voice cracks as she yelled, "Die, smile, die!" And I'll say it took everything I had not to burst out laughing. I had a guy in my Navy division, not really a big deal smiler, just his facial physiognomy. He looked like he was grinning. About the second phase of training, he made an effort to frown to stop the attention. At some point, the division commander asked him what he was smiling about. He responded with something like, "Not smiling, petty officer, I'm just ugly." I had a great team sergeant who had a floater, which is a wonky eye, that he was blind in from an injury in Iraq. So one eye was dead on and worked fine, but he had this one Uncle Ruckus eye that just did its own thing. He was a very physically imposing man with that classic drill sergeant bass-filled voice, and his crazy eye just added to it, and he knew. He told a story about his time as a drill sergeant when 2 privates had sat down on fire watch and were just kind of being real lackadaisical about their duties when he found them. So he started giving them the business, classic Full Metal Jacket style, and finally he just ended his rant right before he was about to smoke them for who knows how long, when one of the offending privates just says, "Drill Sergeant, are you yelling at us or the water fountain?" It stopped him dead in his rage and he just walked away mid-knife hand. We weren't allowed to talk during chow at the galley. You had to point at what you wanted, another recruit to pass you, and they had to silently pass it over. One recruit wanted a napkin and pointed. The other recruit asked, "This?" The Coast Guard drill sergeant immediately came over, circling him like a shark, screaming at him, They made him put like 10 saltines in his mouth and chew until his mouth was full, and then ask the first recruit if he wanted a napkin again. He could barely get it out, spitting pieces of cracker everywhere. Then they screamed at the first recruit to answer him, but we were all silently cracking up. It sounded like this. "So you want a napkin?" with pieces of saltine flying out. "Answer him!" my friend cracking up, almost crying. "No, thank you." It was the best. We had 2 5'1" stocky blonde guys named Johnson in our company one cycle. Different platoons, no relation at all, but they looked really similar. One day during grass week, a couple of J-hats made them face each other and go back and forth screaming, "You're not Johnson, I'm Johnson. No, frick you, you're not Johnson, I'm Johnson." You have no clue how hard it was not to break into a million pieces after about 5 minutes of that. Oh boy. It's nice when theatre and military matters can come together. Also, in case you haven't noticed, the narrator has had to take the original language down about 60 notches for this video. I was a super light sleeper during basic training. One night I woke up for no reason. The sleeping bag was dark except for the light by the desk where the 2 soldiers on fire guard were supposed to be awake and alert. Both of them were leaning back in their chairs, dead asleep. I started to throw my covers off and go wake them up. If a drill sergeant came through and caught the fire guards sleeping, we'd all pay. But then I heard a slow scraping sound to my right, off in the darkness. I froze, heard it again, closer, and a few heartbeats later, I almost screamed out loud as I saw the sharp, intense face of our Samoan drill sergeant in the darkness. His face was covered in full camo. He was low crawling underneath the line of bunk beds towards the fire guards. He had a bayonet in his teeth. We locked eyes and he silently raised a finger to his mouth, signaling for silence. I nodded and sat back to watch the show as the drill sergeant resumed his low crawl under and past my bunk in the direction of the sleeping guards. I have a bunch of stories of funny crap I did to correct soldiers when I later became an NCO myself, but that image, like something straight out of an 80s war movie, will always stick with me. In Navy boot camp, they called forced PT beatings. Everyone knows what a beating is. The Navy doesn't have drill instructors. They call them recruit division commanders, or DCs. One day, standing in ranks, the DC is going around asking random trivia questions about a test we had to take to make sure we had been studying. He gets to a guy who was eccentric, to say the least. This is about a month and a half into boot camp. DC asks the question, the guy gets it wrong, so DC yells, "No, wrong, beat yourself." Literally everyone knew this meant start doing push-ups, so the expectation is that he'll start doing push-ups, as the DC moves to the next guy in question. I was standing across from the guy and he had a confused look on his face. He looked at his own hand for 5 seconds, then hauled off and slapped himself in the face. It made a loud crack sound. He got himself good. I cracked and chuckled, trying to keep my composure at attention. The DC looked at me, then realized why I had laughed had to do with the slapping sound. He turned back to self-slapping guy and asked him if he slapped himself. The guy says, "You told me to beat myself." Cue the entire barracks cracking up. It was a single moment during boot camp where the curtain was raised and a moment of unadulterated levity came over everyone. The DC couldn't even help himself, so the tough guy persona melted away for a good 60 seconds until he regained composure and made us all do push-ups. The push-ups were an easy price to pay for that moment. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I work at a basic training range, and we had a drill sergeant yell at this soldier while they were getting ready to go down a buddy live fire exercise. The soldier froze and started crying. This 18-year-old kid was just in tears for getting yelled at. The drill sergeant yelled at him some more and he finally gave up because this kid wouldn't stop crying. So he made him scoop tears off his face and put them in his pockets till he filled his pockets up with tears. He did this for like an hour. It was hilarious. In my basic training class, I was a squad leader, which is essentially just a person who does extra chores. Anyways, for reasons unknown, myself and the other squad leaders were doing push-ups in the drill sergeant's office. Now, when you do these push-ups, you eventually reach muscle failure, so you just sort of hang out there in the front leaning rest and try to bust out another push-up every few seconds or so. We're all in there dying, and the drill sergeant says to one of my buddies, "Private Hudson, tell me what's the difference between basic training and being in prison." Without missing a beat, Private Hudson says, "Drill sergeant, in prison they get to watch TV." The drill sergeant cracked a little bit of a smile and then told us to get up and get out of there. During Air Force BMT, my flight was practicing marching one afternoon. As our flight was still fairly new, our marching was pretty terrible. One of the assistant TIs reamed us all out and then proceeded to awkwardly mock us by marching and walking like Jar Jar Binks while giving a spot-on impression. I'll never forget it. Not a drill sergeant, but when I was in basic, I saw 3 drill sergeants surrounding a private who was laying down, and they were all screaming, "Go the frick to sleep right now, private! You take a goddamn nap this very second, you poor tired soul!" Not the exact words, but you get the gist of it. I still wonder how he got himself into that predicament. When I was in boot camp and on forced marches, my drill instructors loved having conversations using the recruits as messengers. The DI at the end of the formation would send a recruit to the front to give the DI up there a message and back. They'd either have stupid conversations or talk trash using the recruit. During field training exercise, the drill sergeant told me to go get a trash bag, then go around and collect as many pine cones as I could. For like 3 hours, I had a bunch of trash bags. He then took a little walk around the grounds, contemplated for a bit, and then said he was mistaken and the grounds looked better with pine cones in them. He ordered me to redistribute all of the pine cones. We had this kid who kept wetting himself. One day, after the range, he informs our drill instructor that he'd crapped his pants right after the showers. Our squad bay starts to hold back laughter, only to be interrupted by, "It's not funny!" from the drill instructor. Awkward silence. Okay, it's a little funny, but we aren't laughing. That man never cracked a smile during the whole thing. I've got to say, that kid is either way more dumb, desperate, or determined than me if he's willing to join the frat bro armed forces with a condition like that. I hope things worked out for him in the long run. A buddy of mine told a story from when he was at basic. One guy had said, "Yes, ma'am," to the female drill sergeant earlier in the day, so when they were all lined up, she was going down the line asking each person if they'd called her ma'am earlier. The guy who did was fourth in line. He heard the previous guys say, "No, drill sergeant," and then he said in all seriousness, "No, ma'am." You see, what I'm getting from these stories is that the military training is like joining a non-consensual improv troupe. In the US Air Force, I heard a training instructor ask, "Are you finished yet?" A trainee by the name of Dunn said, "No, sir, my name is Dunn." The training instructor walked away to avoid laughing. There was this idiot in my basic training group that after he'd fired his rifle up on his shoulder, pointed the wrong way, towards the drill sergeant clearing it, with the mag still in the weapon. The drill sergeant, a 6'8" bodybuilder, slammed this idiot into the sandbags, screaming at him, and then the recruit had to lay prone in the dirt while holding a stick for a rifle, periodically saying "bang" for the next 3 hours. Somehow, he still graduated with us. Here's a story from my perspective as a recruit in the Navy boot camp. We had an inspection the following day, so our chief was going around inspecting inside everyone's rack to make sure it was squared away. Eventually, he made it over to my section. He was checking the rack, a bunk bed that opens up beside me, and had it propped open so I couldn't see his face, and he must have kind of forgot I was there. He's searching through this one guy's stuff and sees his small gloves. And he asks, "You know what they say about small gloves?" Now, keep in mind, I don't think any of my division commanders heard me talk up until this point, and I said without any hesitation, "I know that's not true. I wear a size 12 boot, but I can tell you right now I don't have a size 12 Johnson." And my chief slammed the rack shut and looked at me. "What the frick?" He then stormed off to the fishbowl, and all you could hear was him trying to hold back his laughter in the office with the 2 petty officers. "What is that disgusting crud all over your glasses, maggot?" "I believe it's your saliva, drill sergeant, sir." Closes eyes and waits for death. I saw 2 guys laugh when a division commander walked in, so he had them stand almost noses touching each other. One would yell, "Want to hear a joke?" and the other would yell, "Ha, ha, ha," repeatedly for hours. It was hilarious at first, but once their voices started to crack, it got old pretty quick. On day 2 of basic training at Lackland Air Force Base, my flight was returning with our newly issued gear after having our heads shaved and other hurry-up-and-wait tasks. Our training instructor told us to go upstairs and stand at attention by our beds. We ran up there tired after attempting to march what felt like 2 miles each way in the August Texas heat. We were all standing there waiting for whatever's going to happen next. After about 5 minutes, Donnie Barnes says, "That Sergeant Gates is a jerk, am I right?" And you would not believe what happened. As soon as Barnes said Gates, the locker directly behind Barnes's pops open with a creak. Barnes is frozen solid. Out of the locker pops one leg after another, and the 3 taps as Sergeant Gates walks out of the locker and puts his mouth directly next to Barnes's ear and shouts in his gravelly voice, "On your face!" We did so many push-ups. One recruit left his training guide just lying on his rack. My lead division commander decided this was punishable by making the recruit stand in the middle of our berthing, holding the training guide in the left hand, saluting with the right, and then bringing it in and gently whispering, "I love you, training guide. I'm sorry I left you out. I'll never leave you lying around again." That crap was hilarious, especially because we were all put at attention while he did it for 45 minutes. Drill instructor made a recruit stand in front of a tree, pointing, saying, "I'm not funny, you are," when he was caught laughing. The drill instructor did actually laugh at that one. Early on in boot camp, we were post-shower and at attention for the hygiene inspection, wearing nothing but skivvies and t-shirts. The DI is walking the line checking fingernails and whatnot, when one private's Stiff Johnson flops out of his skivvies right as the DI passes him. The DI stops, looks the private in the eye and says, "Private, I don't even like you, much less like you that way. Now put that goddamn thing away before it goes off." The private in question turned purple with embarrassment and tries to stuff his rigid tree trunk back in his skivvies, but he's getting flustered as the guy starts yelling at him for being an incompetent private, and that if he didn't get stowed in 3 seconds, the private would be taking a 10-minute cold shower. Things like, "Do I have to hose you down like an excited chihuahua? Should I call the vet? Good God, private, is that how you greet your mother at night? Stow your gear, goddammit!" Every other private in line was trying not to laugh, and the senior drill instructor had retreated to his office where we could hear him howling with laughter. The private finally gets his junk stowed, and the DI resumes inspection, and you could see he was trying his damnedest not to burst out laughing. Nobody got much sleep that night. There were too many gigglers in their bunks and too many quiet one-liners. Oh boy, you'd think the terror would do something to soften things up down there, but I guess this particular python was paralyzed in fear. I went to Army Basic. I was in the chow line, nut to butt, looking at the back of the guy's head in front of me. All of a sudden, I could feel one of my drill sergeants breathing on me over the separation wall, and he yells, "Carlton, who is your daddy?" To which I responded, "You are, drill sergeant!" My other drill sergeant sprints over and says, "Oh yeah? What does that make me then?" And all I could think to say was, "My mommy, drill sergeant?" Every drill sergeant in the chow hall was dying, and I got the dog crap smoked out of me outside. I have plenty more, either equally funny or possibly even funnier. Like when I was in AIT to be a medic at Fort San, we had to tote a line for bed checks, which is standing on a yellow line by your bunk in your personal training clothes and shower shoes holding your ID card with your tags hanging out, and we used to mess with each other hard in our bay, and right before tote a line, one of my buddies hid one of my shower shoes. So I was in a rush and thinking, frick, okay, I'll just wear one. So I'm standing at half attention in one flip-flop, and my bare foot is just kind of tucked away behind me. Our cadre for check comes up and just looks directly down at my feet, crosses his arms and says, "Carlton, what in the Sam hell are you doing?" All I could get out was to say, "Sergeant, I couldn't find my other shower shoe for bed check," and I think I'd been saving this one up, because he started to smirk and just yelled, "God damn it, Carlton, you're more ate up than a chocolate member in a gay bar," triggering giggles and snickers all throughout the bay. Thankfully, our school cadre were a lot more chill than drill sergeants. We had a TI and TI in training with us when we were marching to a class. Some people were out of step, so the TI started screaming, "Don't you know your right from your left? Did the antenna fall out of your house when you were a kid? Didn't your mommy and daddy let you watch 3-2-1 Contact?" The TI in training lost it, and so did I. I asked my dad about this. He was a recruit division commander. He shrugged and says, "Oh, I laughed. Your hat is called your cover? It's the first day. I wanted some recruits from the back to the front to carry stuff. I said, 'Get up here with your covers,' and they went and grabbed their bed sheets." Ladies, when did you get friend-zoned by a guy? Guys on the internet need a huge reality check. Here's mine. I had this crush on my study buddy in college, and one night he casually looked at me and said to me, "You know why we're such great study buddies? Because we never have to worry about physical attraction or banging each other." See, in my experience, a solid majority of males are oblivious to hints that chicks think are blatantly obvious. I was talking to my boyfriend the other day about before we got together, and a lot of the things I did to try and let him know I was mega into him, they weren't even noticed. In the end, a simple, "I'm into you, we should go out," does the trick really well. Long story short, men suck at getting clues from women, partly because of evolution and social dynamics. So, ladies, don't throw hints, throw bricks. Otherwise, we'll never know, and then you get the guys who assume every woman wants their babies, and the rest who assume that nobody loves them. This one guy would come over to my house and insist on cuddling and watching movies the whole time. He'd keep me up all night on the phone because he slept better when he could hear my voice, and then send me good morning texts and hold my hand whenever the opportunity presented itself. Then he told his best friend that he wished I'd just get over it. I was in love with my best friend for 3 years. We did everything together. We went to the movies, had Doctor Who nights, went hiking. He'd even stopped by to talk to me at work and texted me every night about which episodes of Star Trek were on. He told me all of his crap and I told him mine. He helped me out of my depression, and when I became an unspeakable act victim, he was the first person I told. We gave each other gifts and everyone thought we were dating. He even encouraged the image when we were out in public, but it never went anywhere. Instead of telling me he simply wasn't attracted to me, we continued a charade of couple-like behavior. He started dating someone and I felt the need to be blunt, blunter than I'd already been. I told him I loved him and then he didn't talk to me for a year. He got married in September. Oh, and I'm engaged now, so I guess it all worked out for the best in the end. Haha, well, we're all happy for you. The narrator should note he generally doesn't think the friend zone is a thing, especially in the cases where he hears guys talking about women they've been nice to, not wanting to jump into bed with them, but it did make for a good, well-known concept to introduce the video with. One of my good friends left for the army. I know how lonely you can feel in the military, so I decided to drop over $500 to go halfway across America to a crappy city in Georgia that's basically the first level of hell. It was one tumbleweed-filled mall, a few fast food restaurants, and my hotel. That hotel was not great, but it was worth it to see him just for a few days. We'd been friends since middle school. He was there when my boyfriend broke my heart. I was there when his girlfriend did the same. It was a beautiful friendship, really, and people often made comments about us being a couple. I kinda got sucked into the thought, to be honest. Anyways, I go to a crappy city in Georgia just to spend a few days with him. We have a sweet running reunion jump hug combo. He shows me off to a few of his army friends. We get shakes and burgers together at this old-fashioned Ma and Pa diner, and the next day all we do is cuddle and laugh. We held hands through this crappy one-horse mall. He helped me pick out a cute summer dress. I even initiated a kiss or two. It was like a frickin' movie. It was beautiful. I even wrote a poem that night. I was so inspired by the overflow of emotions. A few months later, he comes back home. I invited him over to have a Skyrim party with a few friends. Denied. Oh, invited him to go dinner? Nope. Okay, hang out? Watch movies and cuddle? Make hot cocoa? Drive-by high five? Nada. Nothing. Zip. I didn't get to see him for about 2 months and he lived right down the road. Turns out his ex, who was dating his best friend while he was gone, told him to stop hanging out with me, and after I asked him about it, I got the classic, "We make better friends than a couple anyways." Frickin' frick. In short, I spent way too much frickin' money to see a guy who wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. You know, multiple men have told me that I'm just like a bro. Different guys and girlfriends seem undecided on whether this means I was getting hit on or friend-zoned. I had the biggest crush on my friend in college. I'd invite him over to study several times. Imagine Cher in Clueless with the hair tossing and the rolling off the bed. Nothing ever came of it, and I thought he just missed the signals. A couple of years later, drunk at a New Year's party, I confessed what I thought was my biggest secret. He admitted that he knew all along and had deftly avoided my advances. It was embarrassing for all involved. Weirdest ever. I'd been hanging out with this guy for almost a year. He liked me and I liked him. I went over to his house once for his birthday, we went to his room and made out a bit. The door was cracked and in came his dog. The dog then started to growl and bite my ankles. A week later I asked if he wanted to be more than friends and he, exact quote, said, "We can't date. My dog hates you. I'm afraid he might hurt you. I hope we can stay friends. I like you, but I love my dog." Friend-zoned by a frickin' dog. I kept getting friend-zoned by this guy that I liked and had been friends with for about 3 years. My feelings didn't start right away. I got vibes from him, or at least I thought they were vibes. One night we were both wasted and we ended up sleeping together, and I thought to myself, oh my god, this is it. He's gonna tell me he has feelings for me too. He ended up telling me that he's gay and that he wasn't trying to force something that wasn't there. But after our drunken encounter, he realized he wasn't even attracted to girls. This really was the best outcome as now we're best friends and he found himself in the process. I fell hard for a boy. We spent a collective 2 months in a casual fling, spread over 5 months. He serenaded me. A few days later, he tells me that he wants to get back with his ex. Whatever, get over him. Mostly. All is well. Then 6 months later, he calls me and tells me he needs someone to talk to. I, of course, go with him. He drives me around while ranting about his once-again ex-girlfriend. We drive past a place where apparently they did the deed in a parking lot, and he tells me all about it. He spends about 2 hours telling me why he's crazy about this girl and why she makes him so mad. And then he takes me home and never talks to me again. Yay! This one guy walked me home in order to ask for my friend's phone number. I went on a couple of dates with one guy I'd met through friends, or so I thought. We proceeded to hook up, and then 3 days later he was dating another girl. He thought we were both just lonely and hanging out. I thought he was the bee's knees. We're great friends to this day, but I cried every time I saw him for the longest time. I've friend-zoned guys before myself, but never since that day. I make it a point to be very upfront and honest. I didn't realize how much worse than heartbreak the friend zone felt. The last couple of weeks, I've been on 5 to 6 dates with this guy, a cop that I've known for years. Yesterday, he texted me, "I'm really enjoying hanging out with you. I know we're not boyfriend-girlfriend material, but I can see us being great friends." Today, he asked me out for lunch and told me about the date he had last night. He told me it wasn't a romantic date, just a friend date, like what we do. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm being friend-zoned. Unlike most people, when I like someone like that and I learn that they don't like me like that back, I usually stop hanging out with them. I don't want to torture myself. So no, I haven't been friend-zoned. I think it's a choice. You can accept it and move on or live in a fantasy hell you've created all on your own. What I've learned from this thread is when guys get friend-zoned, it's, "Derp, you're such a great guy and would be the perfect boyfriend, but you're just not the right one for me. In other words, you're nice but I'm not attracted to you, but let's still hang out." And when girls get friend-zoned, "Derpet, even though we've already been hanging out like crazy and have done things that are wildly inappropriate for a normal friendship, hand-holding, cuddling, making out, or sleeping together, I don't want to have a relationship with you." I can't say which is worse, but they both suck a lot. After getting the opportunity to read almost all of these stories, my opinion is, when this happens to you, just cut said perpetrator out of your life until you absolutely have no more feelings for them. It sucks to lose a friend, but it sucks more to be emotionally used and neglected. I mean, I guess both of these suck, but the narrator has definitely kept up healthy friendships after being turned down or sleeping with someone. I think it might vary from person to person, but if you're mentally strong enough to just accept that things can't be like that, it can work. God damn, I keep reading these stories and for some reason I keep hoping it'll end out okay. Disney has not prepared me for this. This kinda goes along with this thread. I totally friend-zoned this girl in high school. I'd gone to elementary and middle school with her as well, and she was always sort of the weird girl of the girly group. She wasn't chubby, but she wasn't skinny either. Anyway, fast forward 2 years, she plays the trombone in the high school band and has one of her friends give me this note asking me to the Sadie Hawkins. I said no, mostly because I wasn't planning on going at all, but also because she was just a little out there for my tastes. In college, I met her at a bar once, and now she's frickin' gorgeous, smart, and hilarious. I think ultimately, I lost. We decide in the present situation, not the future, and what we decide today might change that. I refused a girl who used me as her motivation to get better. I got refused, and now I'm using that to get better myself. It's always a win-win situation. Alright ladies, this is friend-zoning. I had a massive crush in high school, head over heels. We became friends because I learned that on TV, friendship leads to being girlfriend-boyfriend. Curse you, 90s romantic comedies that promised me the shy, quiet loner when applied a montage makeover sequence could get anything of their dreams. It became clear that this person didn't like me in that way, but wanted to stay friends. That sucks, but okay. I hit on another person almost a year later, and my former crush breaks down in tears because they're afraid they'll lose me and doesn't like seeing me with other people. Because I'm young and naive, I take this for hope that I've actually got a shot with her. Nope. Next 2 years of constant rebuffs, the slightest hints that I'm attracted to anyone else leads to waterworks. Now that is friend-zoning. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. You know, I may or may not have friend-zoned a girl a few years ago without even realizing it at the time. I worked at an animal hospital when I was in high school. There was one other girl who was my age, and we became good friends, joking around at work. After a few months, rumors started to spread that we liked each other, and I laughed them off as my coworkers being nosy. I didn't like her. So one day she came up to me and asked me if I'd like to get pizza after work. We hadn't hung out outside of work, so I said sure. It was fun, but at work everyone called it a date. I said I wasn't sure and that we were just friends. She obviously heard this, so she asked if I'd like to go on a date with her. I told her I wasn't really looking for a relationship at the time. Right around this time, I left the hospital and we drifted apart. I started dating a girl from my school shortly thereafter. A few weeks later, I decided to try and talk with the girl at the animal hospital, and she was very upset with me. Apparently, she'd had to work up the courage to ask me out for a long time, and the fact that I told her I wasn't looking for anything and then started dating someone so soon after hurt her feelings a lot. I've never felt worse, and to be honest, I kinda wish I could go back and take her on a date. She was and is an awesome girl. I've never been friend-zoned before because I'm not pretty or extroverted enough for guys to be my friends. Yay, loneliness! A college friend and I reconnected over Facebook after 8 years. He ended up married to his college girlfriend. No big deal. We kept in touch via Messenger on occasion and were chatting. Nothing inappropriate, but we actually became quite good friends. I met up with him when he visited my town on business. I was engaged then, so he also met my then fiancée. He was the emotional support through that horrendous breakup, and I was his emotional support when he went through his divorce. His wife of 10 years cheated on him twice. Throughout that time, he told me stuff like, "You're the perfect girl," and "Why are you still single?" and all that nonsense. We made plans for him to come to my apartment and drink whiskey and watch ridiculous movies when he was emotionally ready for that. Only it never happened. He started dating a girl 10 years younger than him and me, telling me about how every guy wants her and what does she see in me? She's so attractive. That was the point I cut all communication and moved the frick on with my life. You know, this kind of thing happened to me all the time until my second year of college. I graduated this past spring. The worst one was that I was so in love with my closest male friend in high school, I did end up telling him about 6 months after I met him, but I knew he was after another girl. When things with her didn't work out, about 3 months later, he acted reciprocal towards me, even telling me he'd like to date me, but had some other things to work out for himself and his feelings first. Well, fast forward another 3 months and he ends up falling for another girl. About a year into their relationship, he tells me while I'm at his brother's birthday with him that there's something about me he finds attractive and would like to investigate. Oh, and also that he could never see himself staying with his current girl forever. I never really got the hint and moved on until after he eventually did marry that same girl. They've been divorced for about 2 years now. I had an absolutely massive 4-year-long crush on a friend of mine. I got worse than friend-zoned though. "You're just like a sister to me." Just recently he came out of the closet and he asked me if I'd think it was okay if he hooked up with my brother. I'm a guy and I've apparently friend-zoned a few females before. Although I hate the use of the term friend-zone, I much prefer the term selective dating. There have been a few females before who, even though they are very attractive women, I'd felt I'd benefit more from a friendship with them than a relationship. I feel it's important for myself to have a mix of male and female friends, and although some of you might find this hard to comprehend, I truly believe this is the best path to a healthy lifestyle. Yeah, the narrator maintains his disagreement that either party can expect a relationship without actually having a conversation about it. People who say they're friend-zoned often feel entitled to something from the other, but most of the time neither party has actually asked the other one out or set up a firm boundary. It is messy and complicated, but friend-zoning is generally just a term used by people who've never laid out their feelings on the table to begin with. I've had my current job for about 7 months now. I'm a secretary in a doctor's office. It's a bigger office and there's a few doctors there, and one of them has this amazingly hot son who comes in to help out every now and again when he's not in school. He and I became good friends over time, and I inevitably developed feelings for him, which I assumed were mutual judging by his constant flirting and compliments. So you can imagine my surprise when he pulls me aside one day and asks for my advice because he's planning on proposing to the girlfriend I didn't know existed until that very moment. If I'd had gonads, they would have shriveled up and crawled back inside me. Hello, friendzone, you merciless son of a witch. You know, a guy has to be pretty out of touch to not realize that no girl can get any guy she wants. The whole friendzone thing stems from the idea that if a guy does the right thing, the girl will fall for him. Like pickup artist moves. It ignores the fact that women care what you look like and don't want all the same behaviors from a guy. But my favorite story about a guy not being interested was I was once set up with a guy on a group trip. From the second we met, I realized he wasn't interested and I was willing to switch to friend mode. The The guy proceeded to make it so awkward that I had to avoid him entirely. It was like he thought I was going to lunge on him if I got within 5 feet of him. Totally in love with the guy who introduced me to Reddit. He pays for my meals, cooked me dinner once, offered to meet my parents the last time he picked me up for dinner. Sounds not so bad, right? Last week we were at a bar with some friends, and he brought up the birthday gift I gave him and said, "Yep, she's the greatest friend ever," and tried to give me a high five. I witnessed my own friend-zoning moment. Actually, eventually I did tell him how I felt, and I did not get the response I would have hoped for. I cried a whole bunch. A friend of mine in high school knew I was madly in love with him, so he just manipulated me as much as he could to get what he wanted out of me. So, yeah. I was seriously attracted to a coworker, and we became fast friends. We hung out a lot, went on travels together, shared hotel rooms, but he never busted a move on me. Finally, on a trip to Vegas with him, I got sort of drunk and kissed him. He pushed me away and said that he didn't feel that way about me. I was pretty crushed and embarrassed, so he just held me until I fell asleep. I was really confused. I've never had a problem with men before. This was the only guy who didn't at least want to sleep with me, so I went and convinced myself that he must be gay. He was attractive, but never had anything to do with women. Flash forward a few years, he's engaged to an absolutely stunning, cool as heck, really accomplished woman. Turns out he wasn't gay. He just had really high standards in women and really high standards in personal behavior. Also, yes, I'm well aware that assuming he was gay because he wasn't into me makes me a scumbag moxie. Live and learn. Similar situation from the perspective of the guy in the story. I worked with this girl at summer camp last year and we hung out all the time. Let's call her Jenna. I let her know early on I wasn't interested, but she was convinced otherwise. I'd told Jenna face-to-face twice that I didn't like her. Fast forward to the beginning of the fall semester and I'm moving into a new apartment. She comes over to help me move in, still thinking that I'm set on her, and we get into an argument when I refuse to make out with her. 3 hours of Jenna telling me I was lying to myself, that I really did like her no matter what I said, and how she didn't want to miss any opportunities, though she knew I wasn't interested. No, witch, you're just crazy. So, let me get this straight. The guys of Reddit can share their friend zone stories, but if the ladies do, we get told he just didn't want to date a fatty, or quiet girls that have a crush on someone and then that someone starts dating another girl isn't considered friend zoning, it's you needing to man up, or something along these lines. Get a grip, guys, you're all just as guilty as us ladies. I've noticed a lot of the female stories are quickly being shot down with, "That's not friend zoning, you just don't understand," when in reality their stories are 95% the same as the male friend zoning stories on here. One of the main perspectives that I've noticed keeps popping up here is that apparently guys often mention how weird it would be to date a lady that's taller than they are. Please stop this. Although I do usually tender a reply along the lines of, "It doesn't matter how tall we are lying down," automatically unfriend-zoned. Also, I'm 6'1" and I've heard this line more often than I'd like to. It can be a real bummer. Girls don't get friend-zoned, they get F-buddied. There was a girl in my class who kept on glancing at me and giggling and stuff, and then I found notes with hearts and things in my locker, in my bag, on my desk. I knew it was that girl because I recognize her handwriting. She wrote things like, "I love you," "I want to be your slave," and things gradually got sicker. "Pull down my dress and kiss my forest," or "When are we going to get married? I'm all ready for you down there if you know what I mean." She was actually a weirdo in my class, very scary, and I had no heart for her. So I just walked up to her and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm unable to accept your transaction of love. My heart cannot proceed with such a course. I hope it's okay to keep some distance away from each other as friends." One of my best guy friends in high school who I had a little bit of a crush on said to me, "Hey, guess what just happened?" I said, "What?" I asked Alison to prom and she said, "Yes, we're going to the movies this weekend too." Great! Notice how few to none of these stories have segments of anger and bitterness where the girls decry all men as only liking witches, and how all the nice girls can't get anyone. I fell for a religious 15-year-old guy, told him about my crush, and he replied, "That's inappropriate." That was a slap in the frickin' face. When did you catch someone casting shade at you in another language? Once on the subway in New York City, this young guy was telling his friend in French, "Ugh, who would wear red pants?" I turned to him and said, "You'd better watch out, you're not the only one that speaks French." His friend then gets extremely embarrassed and says, "I told you so." ASL here, you'd be surprised at how many deaf people freely talk crap about everyone. It really is a different culture. I'm American, I was in Paris on the metro, and I heard these drunk American girls talking about me. I glanced at them and heard one of them say, "Do you think he's listening?" And her friend said, "No, we're speaking English. He probably only understands French." I don't even speak French. Backpacking in China, a little girl near me asked her dad, "What kind of person is that?" And I answered in Chinese, "I am an American." I get these from kids all the time in Korea. Usually they point and yell, "Hey mom, it's a foreigner." The mum starts laughing instead of smacking their kid for being rude. In response, my boyfriend and I look at each other in horror and then yell in Korean, "What? It's a Korean person!" Usually the mum and kid go eyes wide and are shocked. Living in Germany for a few years, I could understand German. Was traveling in a barn somewhere near Augsburg. A little girl around the age of 5 or 6 with her mother sat opposite me and pointed at me and asked why I was so black. The mother patiently explains about Afro-Americans and slavery and freedom. The girl waves at me while leaving. I'm Indian. German here. It's astonishing how many people think they're safe if they speak English. They must be aware that English is a universal business language, besides French in a lot of countries, right? Besides that, I listen to a lot of relationship things which people should probably discuss in privacy. As a guy who's worked in tourism in an undisclosed European country, I have overheard way too many glimpses into people's personal lives that I honestly don't think I should have been party to. You've been warned, English-speaking tourists. I'm Hispanic and fluent in both English and Spanish, and people often think I don't speak Spanish. So there was this one time I was at a laundromat folding clothes, while these 2 Hispanic ladies are at a table across from me folding their clothes. Both of them are speaking loudly in Spanish, so I couldn't help but overhear what they were talking about. They started talking about alcohol. One of them said ever since she got married and had a kid, she had stopped drinking. The other lady was saying that she loved getting drunk and couldn't live without alcohol, that she wanted a boyfriend so that he could buy her alcohol and take care of her kid. Then they both started talking about their ideal boyfriend. One of them said she was lucky to have found her husband because he's everything she wanted in a guy. The other chick was listing off a huge checklist for her perfect guy, like hot, must worship her, buy her everything, amazing job, cook, clean, take care of kids, etc. She then was interrupted by her friend saying that she was never going to find the perfect one with her list being so long. She then turns and looks towards me saying, "What about a guy like him?" Her friend immediately rejected that idea and began to make fun of my clothes, hair, glasses, everything. I'm a pretty nerdy-looking dude, admittedly. She then says how I look like a loser who's doing nothing with his life, probably that I'm poor and won't be able to buy her things, and more. I think to myself that this chick is real rude, and I loudly reply in Spanish, "I wouldn't be into a chick like you because I wouldn't want a lazy drunk for a girlfriend." She got silent and just stared at me. Her friend began to laugh uncontrollably. Not me, but I heard from my dad, a stamp collector and an associate curator at the Carnegie Museum. They sold off the collection a long time ago. A group of Polish falcons wanted to see the museum's Polish collection and started trash-talking, in Polish of course, about how badly their country's stamps were presented. The Carnegie Museum had at the time absorbed the entire Smithsonian stamp collection. The curator, who was a Hungarian, spoke English, French, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, and a few other Eastern European languages. After a minute or two, he walked over to the group and kindly asked them to leave in perfect formal Polish. The curator's parting shot was, "The last cultured Pole was Copernicus." I'm bilingual, English and French. I was in the hospital recovering from surgery, high as F on morphine, when the shift change occurred. The 2 nurses were talking in French, one briefing the other on the 4 patients in the room who'd all been speaking English with their visitors. The briefing included color commentary about our personalities, some of it being relevant to our medical status, like, "The woman in bed 2 hasn't gone to the bathroom yet on her own, she used a commode, because she's being a big baby. The man in bed 3 has problems hitting the bowl, and it might be better to have a catheter put back in than to have housekeeping come back every hour. Oh, and he's a jerk for thinking it's funny." When they got to me, Nurse 1 said that I was high as frick and hilarious, and that Nurse 2 would enjoy any conversations I had with my dad if he came back. I sat up and said, "Thank you, my dad thinks I'm funny too," in French, and laid back down. They both stood awkwardly and then said, "You'll be discreet?" I nodded and said, "For more pudding." More pudding arrived presently. Oh yeah, all the time. My other language that I speak is Hungarian, which is really obscure and not really related to any other languages beyond vague grammatical ties to Finnish and Estonian, and there are less than 15 million native speakers, of which just under 10 million live in Hungary. So Hungarian speakers will often just assume it's a secret language when outside Hungary, and that no one else will understand because 99% of the time it's true. That said, there are enough Hungarians in some places like San Francisco that it's best to not assume, and I overheard people quite a lot in the summer that I worked there. I remember, for example, hearing a couple arguing on a Saturday night in the grocery store in the tone that you'd normally be having an argument at home in, but they assumed that no one else understood them. I've overheard hugely emotional goodbyes and confessions in train stations and airports that likewise should have been at home. You sort of really just cringe and turn up the music loudly on your MP3 player, because telling them to stop would just be more awkward for everyone involved. My mum and dad had the best story like this, though, when they were in Austria for their first Christmas as a married couple. Apparently, the table next to them at Christmas dinner in a restaurant there was a man by himself who had a German shepherd, and he was letting the dog literally eat the food off his plate and all sorts of things like that. So my mum spent the entire dinner complaining about this guy letting his dog do all of these things in a restaurant, in Hungarian, but at the end of the meal, as he got up, the man came over to the table and said, "Kelemes karaksoni unipeket kivanok," and left. In Hungarian, that's the polite way of wishing someone a happy Christmas holiday. Props to that guy, and props to my mum for telling this story to us kids so we don't rely on our secret language too much in public. I worked as an English teacher in a Japanese high school. I wanted my students to use only English in class, so I never let them know I understood and spoke Japanese. For a year, I overheard them talk about how long they thought my member was, whether I had a Japanese girlfriend, and so on. At the end of the school year, with all of the students gathered in the gym, the principal asked me to make a farewell speech as I was returning to my home country. So I stepped up to the mic and delivered my speech in fluent Japanese. Have you ever seen 800 jaws drop at the same time? It was glorious. Haha, I bet your glee gave you a really weird energy while delivering that speech, and that you were looking forward to it right up to the point where it happened. God, it would have been funny to see the view of a gobsmacked audience like that. Then again, you plonking a camera on the lectern for us to see it would have raised suspicion. I picked up a summer job at a local fast food joint this summer while on break from college. I'm a white guy from Southern California, and while not fluently bilingual, I do speak a fair bit of Spanish. During my first day, the rest of the workers, as I found out later, thought I was the owner's son and treated me like I was a king, which really confused me at the time. After they came to the realization that I was just a normal guy at a part-time job, the chitter-chatter started and some began to complain to each other that I shouldn't be there, getting territorial as if I were intruding because I wasn't like them. One woman in particular really didn't like me. About a week into the job, I overheard her saying something about me being a jerk and getting in her way. Later on that day, she told me to help her with bringing something to the kitchen from the freezer downstairs because she was busy. To which I responded in Spanish, "But you called me a jerk. Why would I help you do your job?" She was taken aback and kind of stammered off, embarrassed and muttering under her breath. It felt good to confront her and watch her get all red in the face. After that happened, people didn't seem to mind me that much. My uncle was on the other side of this. My family is Dutch, and when my aunt and uncle were living in London, she taught him the phrase in Dutch for something along the lines of, "The fat woman is a B-word," which they'd employ easily without anyone knowing what they were talking about. At least until they went to Amsterdam and the tour guide at the Anne Frank Museum got a bit surly and he momentarily forgot which country he was in. In short, my uncle called a tour guide at the Anne Frank house a fat female dog in her first language. I spent a few years in Seoul, Korea, and gained near fluency after about a year of immersion. Most days on the streets I'd hear something about the size of my nose or my blue eyes. Usually it was satisfying enough to look right at the speaker until they paused, and then I'd just introduce myself and ask them about their day. I did end up meeting a lot of cool people. In some situations it was a game. One of my Korean friends was fluent in English. We used to take the bus together and talk about whatever, just to see what happened with the crowd. He spoke English and I replied in Korean. It really messed with other passengers' heads. Good times. My mum speaks an obscure dialect of Chinese, although not very well since she learned English upon going to school. But she can still usually understand anyone else speaking the Cantonese dialect. One day we went to a market in Chinatown and my mum was trying to order something, but the people had a hard time understanding her because of her obscure dialect. At that point, the old ladies behind us started talking smack about us in Cantonese. My mum said what she got out of it was, "That lady is very Americanized, her Chinese is terrible, and her daughter, me, is clearly half white and because of that she's ugly." We turned around and gave them the stink eye. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm a high school English teacher with mostly Hispanic students, and you'd never know it by looking at me, but I also speak Spanish. I never advertise this to my classes until something like this comes up. I've caught students talking crap about other teachers, about me, trying to cheat on tests and papers, all kinds of stuff. One time that stands out was when a student warned another one not to try cheating, and she responded with, "Es un grito ne sabe nada." He's a little white boy, he doesn't know anything. I looked at her and responded, "Sabes que esto grito entiende todo lo que dices." You know, this white boy understands everything you say. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by some kid in the back going, "Oh, shit!" And then the whole class erupted. I was hiking at the Grand Canyon with my friend and my brothers a few years back, and there was a small group of young Japanese girls, high school age, hiking behind us. On the way down, I hear them talking about how attractive my brother is and giggling. I find it funny, but I didn't say anything. They keep talking about him, and then later my friend, and chatting about who gets who, and still I say nothing. We get to a small overlook with a rock ledge sticking out that's sort of hard to access, and my daredevil brother manages to climb around the backside to get a better picture. One of the Japanese girls sees him and says she wants to go over there too, but she looks like she's going to jump to it, which seems dangerous, so I told her in Japanese that she should go to the other side to climb up. Those girls were absolutely stunned and looked beyond embarrassed. They knew I'd understood everything. I'll never forget it. As a brown guy living in Japan, most people assumed I was a tourist and didn't speak Japanese. I used to overhear all kinds of weird and interesting conversations on the train. My favorite would have to be overhearing two Japanese schoolgirls talking about how hairy my legs were and wondering if it would be possible to make a carpet out of it. I didn't know if I should be flattered or offended. I gave them a wink as I walked out at my stop. I felt pretty badass. Haha, you're a lot more confident than the narrator. I would have burned a deep crimson if I heard people making comments about my body like that. Good lord. I was at Disney World on a school trip, and there was a German father and son standing in front of us in line. They were looking around and muttering all kinds of insults, the usual fat, stupid American bullcrap. Now, having been an exchange student in Germany for a year, I perfectly understood everything they said. So I turned to my friend and started not so subtly insulting them in English, making sure they could hear me. The father turned around and said to me, "You may not understand us, but we understand you." I looked him right in the eye and said with a big smile on my face, "Machen Sie bitte keinen Aufstand, ja? Let's not make a scene, okay?" He just kind of turned around in bewilderment, like the idea that an American could be bilingual, least of all in German, had never occurred to him once in his life. I heard them muttering a couple more insults, like Scheißkerl, Achlock, Idiot, but they didn't really say anything to us after that. It seemed they kind of made it a point to pretend we didn't even exist. Mandarin speaker. It happens all the time. The weirdest time, though, I was in a clothing store in Tokyo and a family came up and asked me a question in Japanese. I had no idea what they were saying, and then they started talking amongst themselves in Chinese about how I could possibly be in Tokyo without understanding Japanese. Yep, I hear ya. I can speak Polish, and by speaking Polish you can in varying degrees understand Ukrainian, Czech, Slovakian, and to a small degree Russian. I've heard things directed at me once or twice. On one particular occasion, two Ukrainian girls were talking about me on the subway, but I wasn't letting them know that I understood. When I had to get off the train, I simply smiled at them and said, "I understood everything you two were talking about," and left. Their faces dropped. Total opposite of this, but my best friend is Polish, and her mother doesn't even speak English very well. She brought us to IKEA one day and brought us lunch, so I asked my friend how to say, "Thank you very much, I appreciate it." I should have known better, but she goes, "Yeah, say, Gorokokam Kianaga," which is something to the effect of, "I love you undressed, working girl, for frick's sakes, I love you undressed." Her mother's face, and my face, I was mortified. She lay on the floor, dying. Her mother started screaming at her and chasing her around. That's the last time I asked her how to say anything in Polish. Yep, all the time. I'm a white girl living in an Asian country. Nobody expected me to be fluent in Chinese, so I heard people talking about me quite a bit. I usually don't bother responding unless they say something insulting about my family. My favorite thing, however, is not responding in Chinese, but in English. For example, when a shop person says in Chinese, "She's probably a tourist, we can charge her $10 more," I'll say in English, "I'm not a tourist and I won't pay an extra $10 for this." Then I leave them wondering if I'm some sort of psychic. Okay, they probably don't actually think that. Somewhat related, I went to get some breakfast tacos, and while I was in line, one female employee asked another, ¿Te la limpias antes de venir? I busted out laughing and their jaws literally dropped. She was asking, jokingly, if the other girl had washed her hoo-ha before coming into work. My wife is fluent in Japanese, and when she was 16 she lived in Japan as a student. But she's a New England wasp with blonde hair, blue eyes, and busty, so the expectation among the locals was that she only spoke American. And the Japanese talked all kinds of crap about her in front of her, businessmen talking about her chest, a grandmother on the subway talking about how American women need to cross their legs when they sit because of the smell. Finally, she gets so fed up with this, she asks a kid in her school how to say "frick you" in Japanese. The kid replies, "We don't really have words for that." My wife insists, surely they must have something, and the kid says, "Okay, say this." Now my wife, armed, waits for the right moment. She was on the train. A businessman said something about her, and she turned and said those words. The businessman immediately blanches and gets off at the next stop. My wife thinks this is amazing and starts using it everywhere. Finally, her homestay sister is with her. My wife uses the phrase on some kid calling her gaijin, and her homestay sister freaks out. "Do you know what you just said?" "Yes, I said frick you to that kid." "No," says her homestay sister. "You just told that kid you were going to commit the unspeakable act on him." In short, 16-year-old girl threatens to unspeakable act most of Tokyo. Oh boy, that's one of those I have to move faux pas that makes you stay in bed for the better part of a week. Still, I'll bet none of those people who insulted her saw it coming, and it probably made some of them pause before talking crap about foreigners again. Also, the narrator would like to apologize for his pronunciation on all of the languages in the video. I don't have time to study all of these. Not only have I done this, I've actually busted employees for policy violations this way too. So much yes. I'm a man with very long hair. One evening at Dell HQ, the Spanish-only speaking janitors were behind me waiting for the elevator, and one of them says, "She sure has a nice butt and beautiful hair." They turned red when I turned around to show them my long, elegant beard. I said, "Gracias," in a cute girly voice. My husband and I, he speaks French and I speak Spanish, and we both speak English, were vacationing in France, and while visiting this castle town some years back, we stopped for lunch. The waiter thought we were Americans and decided to call me a working girl in French when we complained that we had been waiting for 1.5 hours for our food to come out, and said we were going to leave and to please give us the check for what we had consumed. I think the waiter was fired that same day when my husband gave the restaurant manager a piece of his mind in French. I worked for the World HQ of a company, and we were imposing a project on the affiliate in the Netherlands. There were a bunch of English-speaking people, mostly US, UK, and Canada. HQ people worked with an equal number of Dutch people who didn't really want us there. It's very easy to pick up basic words, especially names when you keep hearing them. Someone peeked into the room I was in and asked in Dutch where to find someone. I didn't even notice it was in Dutch, I just answered in English and he left. The 2 Dutch women in the room looked at me horrified, and one stammered and asked how much Dutch I'd picked up. Without missing a beat, the other English speaker in the room replied in a warning tone, "Much more than you realize." Of course, we never had any idea what they were saying when they were talking about us, but those ladies were really nice to us for the next week, and a lot of people quit speaking Dutch around us after that. My father is rather rotund, and at one point we were in a store in Italy while on holiday. Next to the store was a mother with a rather bratty child, and in an attempt to quiet her, the mother somewhat subtly pointed at my father and said, "Manga bimbi," eats children. Sadly, our Italian was not good enough to come up with a comeback quickly enough. I still like to call my father a child eater though. Oh my god, yes, I have so many. I'm half white, half Filipino, but I look like a skinhead with a slight tan. Nobody would ever believe I spoke Tagalog, so I get a lot of these. Here's a few of my favorites. I'm a bit heavy-set and I was at a friend's wedding, which was predominantly Filipino. Anyways, I was in line at the dessert buffet and 2 of the people I was sitting with asked me to go get them food as well. So I had 3 plates in my hand as I was waiting to get served, and 2 Filipino ladies behind me said in Tagalog, "Look at this fat guy, he's gonna eat everything before we get there." I chuckled and shook my head. I didn't bother confronting them since I have a bunch of aunties that would probably do the same thing. I was helping a Filipino co-worker pick up some furniture she brought from a patio furniture place. Since I owned a truck, she asked if I could help her. During this time, everyone had Nextels, and you could do that direct connect thing that made the phones act like walkie-talkies. So she direct connects her husband, telling her we're on our way. He replies back in Tagalog, "Don't let your coworker in the house, he might steal something." Now, this being on the speakerphone, I heard the whole thing, and she knew I spoke Tagalog and understood. Her face turned bright red and she started yelling at her husband, "You stupid idiot, he speaks Tagalog." When we got to the house, he acted like nothing had happened, even invites me in for a beer. I politely said no thanks and helped my coworker unload the truck. She kept apologizing, she was so embarrassed. I was at Disneyland one time when we were on Main Street standing in a crowd waiting for the parade to go by. There was a section roped off for handicapped people. I noticed there was a Filipino family in front of us with a middle-aged man in a wheelchair taking up the front row. As the parade started, the man in the wheelchair got up and walked forward to get a better view. One of the older women started yelling at him in Tagalog and told him to sit back down or he'd blow their cover. Apparently, they got the wheelchair so they could cut in line and get special treatment. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.